I used to work at McDonald's. It's been a few years now, but I'll never forget my time there. Working in fast food can be crazy sometimes, especially at McDonald's, which is one of the most well-known fast food restaurants around. I remember that after getting hired, it took me a few weeks to get used to things. The job was just the second one that I ever had, and I was 17 years old and in high school. But after I got the hang of it, I started to enjoy working there. Most of my coworkers were nice and we got along pretty well. There was one coworker though who seemed to get hired a few weeks after me. It was this guy who I will just call Joe for this story. Joe was about a few years older than me. I remember that I didn't really interact with him at work much. We worked the same time, maybe 3 or 4 shifts. Then one night I worked until 9 p.m. When I got off, after clocking out, I left the building. I had drove to and from work to my parents' house at the time in the old car that I had. When I got out into the parking lot to leave though, I saw Joe standing there. He approached me and said hi. Joe then asked me for a ride, saying that he was stuck there and had no way to get home. I didn't see a reason not to and I was quick to tell him yes, but I also realized that I hadn't seen him at all that day to that point. I didn't think he had even been working that day. So this seemed kind of weird that he was even here. After we both got into my car, he gave me his address and we left. We talked to each other a decent amount on the drive. He seemed nice for the most part, but also did seem a little bit strange. Something just struck me as odd about him and slightly uncomfortable. But nevertheless, we made it to his house and then he left and went inside. I then drove back to my parents' house. Now, maybe a week or so later, after working another night shift that Joe was not working for, I remember leaving again. I got inside of my car no problem though, but I remember looking around the parking lot and noticing a car with what appeared to be Joe behind the wheel. This car was parked in like the back corner of the lot, and it had been backed into a space. I was wondering what he was doing here again because he hadn't worked and I hadn't seen him. But I didn't really think too much of it, and then I backed out and I left. However, when I got to the stop sign at the end of the parking lot to turn onto the road, I noticed a car approaching me from behind. It was Joe's car. I guessed he was leaving now too, and I pulled onto the quiet road and he turned out right behind me. He then proceeded to follow me all the way back to my street. All I knew was that he didn't live over here because I had given him a ride before, and after all, it wasn't even close to this area. I was confused and also creeped out by this. When I approached my street, I went past another one. I wasn't really sure where to go, so I just went around the block. Then I pulled into some random driveway to turn around, but when I did, I noticed that Joe kept driving down the street. So I waited until he was gone, and then I left that house and I went home. I was confused by why he had followed me and what was going on with him. It was very strange. So fast forward to a few days after that. I was actually on my break at work at McDonald's and I got a text from Joe. There was a group chat for some of the employees, so that's how he had got my number. He asked me if I could give him a ride to work the following day. I mentioned this to a coworker, and I was told that Joe had already been fired. This creeped me out a little bit. I came up with an excuse and told him no. The next time that I worked after that, I found out that Joe had also been banned from the McDonald's now. Apparently, he showed up and got into a confrontation with our boss. I blocked his number after that in case he did anything more, and I never heard from him again. I only worked at the McDonald's for a few more months. Still, I wonder what would have happened if I agreed to give him a ride to the McDonald's. I wonder why he followed me home and why he was so strange. I have a crazy story to tell from one time that I went to McDonald's. So this was years ago now, and I went to McDonald's one Saturday in the afternoon. I live by the city, so there's a lot of people who live in the area. Many businesses are very busy on the weekends. So I walked inside of the McDonald's and I saw several long lines to order. It was nothing too crazy, but I was surprised at just how many people were there. So I got into the back of one of the lines and waited. McDonald's is usually pretty fast, and the line started moving quickly. I was really hungry and craving a Big Mac. As I waited and slowly moved up in the line, many people got in line behind me as well. I was watching the employees scramble to keep up with all the orders, and it was a hectic scene. So eventually, I was up next to order. That's when I heard a little bit of talking behind me, and I sensed somebody approaching. I turned around to look, just in time to see a man approaching me. When he saw me, he asked if he could just go in front of me quick, because he just wanted a glass of water and was really thirsty. I said sure, because obviously that wouldn't take long at all to just get a water cup. The man then stood in front of me and waited for the person at the counter to finish ordering. Once they had, the man stepped up to the employee behind the register. At first, I was kind of zoned out like I had been, just observing and waiting. But then, after probably 30 seconds, I snapped out of it and I realized what was strange. The man was just talking to the employee as if he was ordering. He wasn't just getting a water cup. I took a step forward and listened. I heard the man ordering food, and he was ordering quite a bit of things as well. He must have ordered enough food for 5 people. As he was rattling off more items, I tapped him on the shoulder. When I did, he did a half turn and then waved me off in the rudest possible way. I asked him what on earth he was doing, but he ignored me. The man was even looking at the menu and asking the employee questions about stuff. He took at least another minute and a half to order, and it made me really mad. When he was finally done, he walked away to wait, and I stepped up and I ordered what I was getting. After that, I went over to wait as well, and I saw the guy standing near the drink machine. I then confronted him, telling him that he told me he was just getting a water. The man said he changed his mind, and I told him that I never would have let him in front of me if I knew that. When I said this, the man just told me to shut up and then laughed in my face. Obviously, this made me angry, and I told him that he was a terrible person before finally walking away. But as I started to walk away, I guess the guy came up behind me because the next thing I knew, he splashed me with his drink. My hair got wet and a bunch of people saw it. It was embarrassing, but this guy also looked like a real jerk in front of all the people as well. I didn't bother to go after him and fight him or something. I knew better than to get into a fist fight at my local McDonald's, so I moved away and dried myself off. A couple people asked me if I was all right. Then I remembered that my order was called before the man's order. It was probably because he ordered so much more stuff than I did. I walked up and had to go past the guy who was standing right in front of the counter getting in everybody's way. When I got my order, he looked at me and I said to him, "Look who got their order first, loser." Then I started to leave. The guy did not say anything back to me. I then left the McDonald's and walked to my car. Well, I guess the guy followed me out. He must have been mad about what I said, because when I reached my car, I heard him approaching. I turned around, and this time the guy splashed his drink on my car. He then kicked my headlight, cursed at me, and walked back inside. I was furious, but the car did not appear to have damage, so I just got inside of it and drove home. It would only cause more problems to keep getting into it with this guy. Luckily, after that, I never saw him again. The whole thing was so stupid and crazy. I hope that guy learned a lesson though and is nicer to people. Last year, I went to McDonald's one evening. You see, I work from home and I live in an apartment building. One day, I had a lot of work to get done. However, sometime in the afternoon, when I still had a lot to do, my Wi-Fi cut out. I don't know why it happened, but after resetting things and trying to figure it out for a long time, I lost my patience. It still wasn't working, and there's a McDonald's just down the street from my apartment complex. It's so close that I can easily walk there, which I've done before several times late at night. Anyways, I took my laptop and left my place to walk to the McDonald's. I was hoping to use their free Wi-Fi and be able to get the work done that I needed. When I got inside, the restaurant was not very busy, which was nice. I set up at a booth in the back corner and was able to successfully connect to the Wi-Fi. I ordered a coffee and later on a little food, and I worked hard. Over the next few hours, I was able to get the work done that I needed to. And over time, the McDonald's got quieter and quieter as the night wore on. By about 9 o'clock, I was done with my work, and I was the only customer in the entire restaurant. They stayed open past midnight, but I decided to leave then and go home. So I packed up my laptop, and I headed out to walk back to my apartment. When I stepped outside, one of the first things I noticed was there was a man standing around sort of by the doors. He was wearing a sweatshirt with a hood and looking down. I glanced over, but turned and walked in the opposite direction. When I did, he almost immediately started walking after me, which got my attention. As I continued to walk, I noticed that the man started to trail me by about 30 feet or so. I then got onto the sidewalk and just hoped that this man was not actually following me. After walking down the sidewalk for a bit, I looked behind me. I saw the man, still there and still about the same distance away. He was looking down, so I could not see his face. This was becoming more and more suspicious. As I approached my apartment complex, I did not want to let this man into my building, assuming that he was in fact following me. So I started to walk faster and faster. After making it to my apartment complex, I looked back and saw that the man was still about the same distance away. He must have walked faster as well. This was not good. I walked down the sidewalk inside of my complex, and I decided that I would not go through the front door. Instead, I walked towards my building like I was going to go past it. Then, at the last moment, I turned to the right and went to the side of it. There, it had a less used side door. I walked really fast, got to the side door, and I knew that I had one shot to use my fob to unlock it. Luckily, I got it right away, and I quickly opened the door and went inside. Then, as fast as I could, I closed it behind me. Right after the door closed, the man appeared right there and tried opening it. He couldn't get in. And clearly he didn't live there, because if he did, he would have had a key. It confirmed to me all my fears of the guy following. I felt grateful to be inside safely, and I wasted no time and I went upstairs to my unit on the second floor. When I got inside, I went to my bedroom window and I looked out. I saw the guy still standing there in the grass. He looked up at me and then flipped me off. I closed my blinds and I hoped to never see the guy again. And luckily, since then, I haven't.
It was about 2 a.m. and I was on the way to my job at my local McDonald's to open with one of my favorite managers. She told me to text her when I got there so she could let me inside. Sometimes we'd have to be there really early in the morning if someone from the previous shift had to leave early. However, those were rare occasions. Once I pulled in, I noticed a man standing outside of the McDonald's near the front door, his hands in his pockets while smoking a cigarette. He was shooting me this sort of menacing stare as if he were waiting impatiently for us to open. Let me point out that it was pouring outside, so I was really confused why this guy wasn't just sitting in his car. I then parked and texted my manager that I was here. Thankfully, she had an umbrella with her and walked over to me so we could walk in together without getting wet. I say my usual good morning and she then rushed me inside saying, "Did you see that guy out there?" I told her I did and we began wondering why he was outside in the rain. We assumed that maybe he was just on something and that he was waiting for us to open so we could get breakfast. However, that wouldn't be for another 2 hours until 4 a.m., which is around the time most McDonald's open here in Canada. My manager proceeded to help me refill sauces, napkins, and things like that. She then tells me that she's gonna be in the back office if she needed me. I tried my best not to think about the man outside and tend to my shift so that we could get ready to open. Right then, my manager calls me in from her office and tells me to come look at the security cameras. I go into her office and we both watch as the man from outside starts talking on the phone with someone in Spanish. It's not common for someone to be speaking Spanish in Canada, but it happens. The cameras outside do pick up audio, however, it's not the best and you couldn't hear it well. Now, my stepmother is Puerto Rican, so while I understand a fair bit of Spanish, I don't speak it. What he's saying on the phone, though, is horrific. For one, he knew my manager and I would be the only ones working, and he was planning on, quote, snatching our asses up. He then proceeds to pull out what appeared to be a large screwdriver from his coat and turns to face the door. That's when we both hear knocking on the glass coming from the door. My manager tells me to go to the door, but to not open it while she called the police. I walk out into the lobby and there he was, slowly knocking on the glass door with his hand behind his back. I motioned to him that we were closed and to come back later. However, he didn't seem to get the hint and just stood there soaking wet. I try my best to ignore him, but the sound of him pounding and scraping his nails against the door was petrifying. All of a sudden, I then hear him loudly say something from outside. Like I said, I only understood some Spanish, so I couldn't really understand it exactly, but it sounded like he called me cerda, which for those who don't know means pig in Spanish. No matter how many times I tried to ignore him, he'd always be there watching me through the window. Police in this area of my city don't take things like this lightly, so they arrived within 10 minutes. Once law enforcement pulled into the McDonald's, the man tried to run to his car. He didn't get very far, as police were able to tase him before he could drive away. My manager and I watch as police cuff this dirty-looking man while putting him into the backseat of a cop car. With very poor English and an angered tone, he claims that he was just hungry and that he wanted food. Though the screwdriver and the tape they found in his car said otherwise. As my manager made her statement in a police report, I see the man giving me that same menacing stare. I'll be honest, I got goosebumps just seeing him like that, as most things don't freak me out. It was a look of anger and hatred, like as if he had known we knew what his plan was and how he was upset that he was unsuccessful at it. I stayed at that McDonald's for another year after that incident. Police had said they would update us on everything, but nothing ever became of it. Thank you to my manager for protecting me, and thank you to my stepmom for teaching me Spanish.
I used to work at McDonald's. When I did, I was usually working behind the counter and taking orders. Well, a few months into my time there, and something really strange happened. I was still in high school at the time and living with my parents. The McDonald's that I worked at was only about 5 minutes away. This made it convenient and nice to work there. So one night, things were pretty normal. Like many times, it was quiet when I got to work at the McDonald's in the afternoon. Then, in the early evening, things picked up quite a bit and were pretty busy for a while. When it got to be a little later at night, it quieted down. But during the time that it was still kind of busy, but just starting to quiet down, I was inside taking an order. I remember that a customer was ordering, and during this time I noticed a person entering the McDonald's out of the corner of my eye. But I wasn't really focusing on them, because I was more focused on the customer who was currently ordering. After walking in though, this person started walking over as if they were going to get in line behind the person ordering. I noticed that it was a woman. Instead of getting in line though, she took out her phone and appeared to take a picture of me. It was really obvious. Then, right after doing so, she quickly turned around and walked right out of the restaurant. I must have had a surprised look on my face, because I remember the customer who had been ordering look at me and then turn around to look. By the time she looked though, the woman was walking out of the door. The customer asked what happened, and I told her that the woman had took a picture. At first, I wasn't sure if the woman was directing her picture at me or at the customer. We both thought it was weird, but then the customer finished her order. I was wondering for most of the rest of the shift why that woman took my picture. Maybe I had took her order earlier that day, and she either didn't like me or liked me, but I hadn't remembered seeing her at all, and I thought that I would. I would see so many people, I guess anything was possible. And if I took her order the previous day, I certainly wouldn't remember. Either way, it was sure weird. So the next time that I worked was a few nights later. It was a very similar shift, and believe it or not, basically the exact same thing happened. Except this time, I was not taking anybody's order. I was just standing behind the counter by myself. Once again, the door opened, the same woman walked in. At first, I recognized her, but I wasn't sure exactly from what. After making her way inside a few steps though, I remembered exactly where I had seen her before. And then, she once again took out her phone and took my picture. This time, I asked her what she was doing, but she did not answer me. Very quickly, she put her phone away, turned around, and walked out. I was once more left very confused. I did not see her for the rest of my shift. I worked a few more times after that, and did not see her or have my picture taken that I was aware of. Then, one day, probably a week or so later, I got home from school. My mom said that there was a letter in the mail for me, and she showed it to me. There was in fact a letter addressed to me at the table, which my parents had got from the mailbox. I opened it up, curious as to who it was from. Inside of the envelope was just 2 photos. When I looked at them, I instantly recognized them. They were the 2 photos that the woman took of me working at McDonald's. There was no letter to go with it or anything, just the photos. There was also no return address on the envelope. It was so weird. I told my parents about it, and the next time that I worked, I told my boss. Everyone was confused and didn't know who would be doing it or why. But after that, I never saw that woman again. There were no more pictures taken of me at work or sent to me. Still, I never found out who did that or why. It's very strange.
I'm an 18-year-old female, and this happened back in 2009 when I was a freshman in college. I lived in a small city in the US, which was an overall safe area in my state. I even told my friends that even some of the criminals in my city were polite. Long story short, it was a neat little city that really deserved more attention. The people were nice, and sirens would almost never be heard. One night, a few of my college friends and I had just finished a concert from our school performed by a local band. They never made it big, but they were still well known around the area, especially if you were into music. Anyway, we leave the school trying to find somewhere to eat as we were practically starving. It was around 11 at night, meaning most places were closed, making it harder for us to find food. Eventually, we decided to go by a nearby McDonald's as we were dirt poor college students with little to no money. We enter the McDonald's and order our food and find a nearby table to eat at. For some context, there were 4 people. Me, my friend Emily, my friend James, and his girlfriend Samantha. As we're eating a total of 40 plus McNuggets, I notice a man walk in hyperventilating as if he had just ran a marathon. He wore black sweatpants, a white shirt, and had on a backpack. Not that there was anything wrong with him, but something about him just made me feel uneasy. On top of that, he seemed disheveled with long messy hair and looked as if he hadn't been to the gym in years. Now, I'm not one to judge people, but there was something about this man that was just off. Not wanting to pry and too tired to care, I think nothing of it and just continued eating while talking to my friends. I nudge Emily and whisper in her ear if she thinks that man seemed off. She just so happens to agree with me and tells me that we should just not pay attention to him. We focus on eating our food while chatting with our friends when James turns around and made eye contact with the man. However, not even a minute after, he walks up to our table with a flashlight, smiling his smile. Hey there, weird favor. The toilet in the bathroom is overflowing. Can one of you help me with it? We all just kind of look at each other confused and say that we were eating and to ask an employee. He disregards our suggestion and insists we help him out. We politely decline and tell him no, to which he then asks once again. But before I was about to say something, James says in an annoyed tone to leave us the hell alone and to go away. His face went pale and he grabs a drink before leaving the restaurant. Samantha kept telling us as to how uncomfortable the man made her feel and that she's sworn she's seen him before. We began to ask her if she was sure, and if she did, where she saw him. She said that she couldn't remember but thought it was sometime last week. We eat for another 20 minutes before leaving to go back home when Emily says something I didn't realize. You know, he never went into the restroom in the first place. How would he know the toilet was overflowing? I look at her with this unsettling face, and that's when I immediately thought of the backpack. Upon realizing this, several questions came up in my mind about why he had a backpack. What were the contents of it? What were his intentions? And what would he have done had one of us gone in there? These questions bothered me for a good week when James saw a chilling news report. Apparently, the same tactic had happened at another restaurant, only this time it actually worked. The same man had tried the approach and managed to lure a woman standing by the men's restroom. He was able to pull her in and do things I won't mention until a few people helped break up the situation. The news showing the man's face on TV made James almost spit out his water as he saw this. James ends up calling the police to put in our tip and what had happened. Police in my city don't mess around, so whenever something bad happened, they were ready to stop it. Eventually, Samantha had remembered seeing the man at a pub she was at. He didn't do anything, but described him as being drunk and annoyed at the bartender. Needless to say, this news went around like wildfire around my city and even my school. What had once been this nice area with barely any crime, only to have something disturbing happen. For those of you wondering, yes, he was thrown in prison. I ended up staying away from that McDonald's for a good while until the paranoia faded. It wasn't until a year later where I learned a truth I didn't know. James and Samantha had moved away, and it was actually Emily who had told me this. During dinner one night with her, I had asked her if she had remembered about the man from McDonald's many years ago. Her eyes went wide, and she said she was going to tell me something she never told me. Turns out, the man had ended his life in prison not too long ago. He couldn't live with the pain anymore and just decided to end it. I was shocked when I learned this and really couldn't believe it. However, it was nice to know that he couldn't hurt any more people while knowing our city was much safer. Anyway, that's my story, and I hope you can all learn from this and help prevent it. If you see or feel something is off, you need to tell someone. There are truly some messed up people in this world.
Halloween night had a strange energy that year, even before anything actually went wrong. It was almost the way the air carried that sharp bite of fall, the way every porch light seemed dead, making more shadows than actual light. My little brother and sister were thrilled, faces painted, plastic pumpkins swinging from their arms, darting up the driveways with that sugar rush excitement only kids can muster up. Me, I was 19, way too old to be out here, and yet here I was, carrying the mantle of the responsible one. My mom had asked me to tag along since Dad was working late, and she didn't trust the neighborhood enough to send the kids off alone. I graduated that year, supposed to be figuring college or a job out, something. Instead, I was walking two kids in costumes down the streets that I'd trick-or-treated myself a decade earlier. Now, don't get me wrong, I love them, I'd do anything for them. But being 19 and stuck babysitting on Halloween night felt like one more reminder that I hadn't gotten my own life together yet. I felt my phone buzz in my pocket. A buddy of mine was close by, down one of the side streets. He had this little baggie for me, nothing major. I'd been looking forward to it all week. Just a quick handoff, maybe share a joint, nothing crazy, 5 minutes tops. The kids, they'll be fine. They had friends in their group, and every house on the street has a porch light glowing. It couldn't be any safer in my mind. All right, you two stick to this block, okay? I said, crouching down to look them eye to eye. My sister's vampire fangs had slipped down to where she grinned, and my brother was busy adjusting the mask on his cheap Batman costume. Both of them nodded back at me. Don't go past that corner. I'll be right back. They didn't question it. Candy was calling. So they bolted off toward the next house, already comparing loot from their pumpkins. I slid down that side street, my steps quick to get this over with. I wanted nothing more than to just get baked. The noise of kids laughing, the porch chimes rattling would grow quieter with each yard that I passed. The street lights thinned out here. The glow of jack-o'-lanterns gave way to more shadows. It was amazing how fast the atmosphere would shift when you left that main drag. Just one block over and it felt like another world completely. That itch in me, the need for something reckless, something just mine, pulled me along though. I felt guilty, sure, but I told myself again and again it's not that big of a deal. I'll be back before the kids will even notice. My mom will never know. Nobody would except me, my buddy, and the weed. I spotted my friend near the end of the lane, leaning up against a half-busted picket fence with his hoodie pulled up. The street was quiet. The sounds of crickets were filling in the gaps between our words. If I'd known what was waiting in the dark, just beyond that fence, I never would have gone there. He handed me that little baggie like it was nothing. We barely had enough time to laugh about sneaking it past my folks before the brush beside us erupted. We never really stood a chance. Something exploded out of the shadows. He came fast, really fast, like he'd been coiled there waiting for the moment to strike. 1 second it was just us, leaves rustling. The next there was a full-grown man barreling right into us. He didn't yell words, he screamed, an animal shriek that ripped through me worse than the impact of his actual body, and the man sounded absolutely terrified. My friend hit the dirt, the baggie flying. I staggered back, arms up instinctively, and then his weight slammed into me again. His face was now inches from mine, eyes glassy, wild, pupils blown out wide. I couldn't even see the color around him. His mouth was foaming, spit sprang across my cheek as he clawed at my jacket. I shoved him, but he came back twice as strong. His fists weren't controlled punches, they were frantic. He scratched, he bit at the air like a rabid dog. My buddy scrambled up and grabbed the guy by the shoulders, trying to drag him back. For a second, I thought we'd actually get him off of me, but then the man twisted, swinging his elbows and catching my friend across the jaw, so hard that I heard his teeth clack. "What the fuck, man?" my buddy yelled, holding his face. I didn't waste time. I ran my shoulder into that guy's chest, shoving with everything I had. He stumbled backward into the brush, legs tangling up in the branches, and then just like that, he was gone. He disappeared so quickly it was as if it never even happened. I stood there trying to catch my breath. My hands shook as I looked over at my friend. Blood was trickling from his split lip, his hoodie ripped at the shoulder. "What the hell was that?" he said. I couldn't answer because there wasn't an answer. Then, more sounds hit us, screams. Not the wild animal screaming of the man, but the terrified broken sound of children crying out. Shit, my brother, my sister. Every ounce of blood in me immediately turned to ice. "Shit," I whispered, then I was running. We tore down the lane, shoes pounding the asphalt. I could hear my buddy behind me swearing under his breath, but all I could think about was those screams. Every second counted. Every step felt like I wasn't fast enough. My friend and I were pretty decent-sized dudes, even at 19. It took both of us, everything we had to get that dude off of us. My kids' siblings, they didn't stand a chance, and in my mind, they were already dead. We rounded the corner and I saw them, my siblings struggling in the man's grip. He had them both, arms like iron bands around their small bodies, dragging them toward a ditch that ran alongside the road. Their candy bags were overturned, chocolate bars and lollipops littering the ground. I screamed at him to let go, and the man didn't even turn his head. He snarled some kind of weird, awful sound, tightening his grip on my brother, dragging him down into the weeds. My sister clawed at his arms, her fangs clattering out of her mouth as he screamed out for me. I didn't think anymore, I just threw myself at him. We crashed into the ditch together. My shoulders screamed with pain as it hit the dirt, but adrenaline kept me moving. I grabbed fistfuls of filthy shirts, yanking him off my siblings, punching wildly. My friend was there too, swinging a rock that he picked up, smacking the guy across the back of the head. The man didn't stop. If anything, he got worse. He clawed at me, fingernails raking against my cheek. I felt the sting of blood, but I still didn't stop. I scrambled free, sobbing while my brother kicked the man in the ribs with the force of sheer panic. I told them to run, to get back, go. But they didn't. They hovered close, too terrified to leave me. The guy lunged again, teeth bared now, like he was gonna bite me. I ducked and drilled him in the ribs. It wasn't a lights out hit or anything, but it was enough to check him. He stopped and actually gasped out loud, grabbing his stomach, acting human for a brief moment. For a brief moment, he stood there, chest heaving, eyes bulging, drool and blood slicking his chin. His body trembled like he couldn't contain the madness within it. And just like that, he bolted, tore off into the woods, crashing through the branches, his screams echoing long after he was gone. The silence that followed was worse than the actual fight. My siblings were clinging to me, both sobbing, their costumes torn, faces streaked with tears and dirt. My brother's voice cracked when he said, "He was gonna take us, he was gonna..." "Don't." I cut him off, pulling them both close. "He's gone, okay? I promise you're okay now, you're okay." But the truth hit me. They weren't okay. I wasn't okay. None of us were. But I guess we were alive. We stood there in the wreckage, candy crushed under feet, the night around us heavy with the weight of what just took place. My friend was leaning up against a fence, pale, blood still seeping from his lip, muttering "Jesus Christ" over and over. "We're going home, now." "Yeah." "You got a phone?" "No, man." "All right, well, walk with us. Let's stay together." Every step we took felt like we were walking through some kind of enemy territory, shadows pressing in on all sides. I kept my siblings in front of me, my buddy trailing behind. I didn't care about the weed, didn't care about my split cheek or the blood on my hands. All I cared about was getting them home. Every rustle of the leaves, every crack of a branch, I was sure he was coming back for us. My little brother clutched my hand so tight that it cut off my circulation. My sister walked on my other side, pressing tight against me, her plastic pumpkin swinging empty and broken. My buddy limped behind, spitting blood into the gutter, glancing over his shoulder every couple of steps. By the time my house came into view, I thought my heart was going to give out. We stumbled inside, slammed the door, and locked it twice. My brother started crying again, loud, heavy sobs. My sister wasn't much better. I tried to sound calm, but my voice shook when I said it's okay. We're home. You're safe. My parents' face went white when they saw us. My mom grabbed my sister, checking her over, while Dad got on the phone with the police. I kept saying the same thing to them. Some guy, he came out of nowhere. He tried to take them. But the words would get caught in my throat. The cops rolled up quick, and for once, sirens were the best sound I'd ever heard. They fanned out through the neighborhood, flashlights sweeping throughout the woods. Less than an hour later, they came back with them. I only caught a brief glimpse as they pushed him into the back of the cruiser. His shirt was torn, his arms were scratched to ribbons from all the brush, his face was streaked with blood and spit. He was still screaming, words jumbled, thrashing like some kind of man possessed. One of the officers shook his head and muttered, "Popped up on God knows what. Lucky you kids got away, huh?" Lucky, that's what they called it, but luck didn't explain the way his eyes looked, those black pits void of reason. Luck didn't really explain how strong he'd been or the way his shrieks cut through the night. That incident ended up defining the rest of the year. My siblings would sleep in our parents' bed for weeks. Me? I'd lie awake, staring up at the ceiling, hearing phantom footsteps outside, knowing now that monsters don't really have to wear masks on Halloween. They're just people. The Autumn Festival was definitely something our town lived for. One night a year when Main Street didn't feel like an actual ghost town. The courthouse steps glowed underneath orange string lights. The smell of cider hung in the air, and every shop front had pumpkins propped up in the windows, scarecrows left and right. You could almost trick yourself into thinking that we were part of some postcard perfect New England hamlet, instead of a place where the Dairy Queen had gone under. Not once, but twice. I was stuck running the ring toss booth with 3 of my friends, our quote-unquote volunteer hours for National Honor Society. Mostly, it meant leaning up against the counter, heckling kids who couldn't throw a plastic ring over a 2-liter bottle. The prizes were dollar store junk, but the little ones went wild for them. I pretended to care because, well, that's what you do when you're 17 and don't want to look like a complete waste of space. The street was crowded, families with strollers, couples with styrofoam bowls of chili, the marching band hammering out some screechy version of Sweet Caroline. Booths and vendors lined up on both sides of the road. Cotton candy, face painting, raffle tickets for a quilt made by the Methodist ladies. Above it all, paper lanterns bobbed in the cool October wind. For a while, it was all background noise, the normal. And then I took notice of something. Two men, I guess they could have been kids, coming down the sidewalk in stiff lockstep. Both wore these crude paper mache masks, which were uncommon. Bulbous noses, lopsided grins, paint smeared on like clown makeup. At first I assumed it had to be part of the festival, right? But nobody else's costume matched up with these guys. They stood out in a way that made me feel very uncomfortable. They were really tall as well, eerily so. Even from across the street where I stood, I could tell something was off about their arms, the way they swung low as hell, hands almost dangling to their knees. Their bodies were narrow, compressed, like somebody had stretched them from head to toe. I immediately felt the hair on my neck stand up, though I couldn't have told you why. When I told this story to a college friend, he told me that I experienced the uncanny valley effect. A woman and child passed by our booth right then, a mom with tired eyes holding her daughter's hand. The girl was carrying a candy apple bigger than her fist, red glaze catching the lamplight. She laughed, tugging at her mom to stop near the petting zoo. Normal, ordinary, safe. What the American experience is all about. The masked men slowed as they passed, their crude grins frozen on us now. Nobody else seemed to notice, just me standing there with the ring in my hand, my throat now gone dry. Something about them pressed on me, but my instincts were telling me to run. My buddy next to me laughed, said they looked like scarecrows on stilts, but I kept watching until they disappeared off into the crowd. Okay, I'm imagining things, it's Halloween, whatever I'm doing, it's all in my head. Seeing them melt off with normal people was a huge relief. Actually, as it meant, well, they were probably normal, just leaning hard into the whole Halloween vibe, The band took a break and the PA whined. People were drifting toward chili and cider, and we kept the rings moving and the line honest. The mother and the girl came back over. The girl's candy apple was half eaten, red chips of sugar stuck to her fist. They crossed the alley between the barber shop and the antique place. A string of lights sagged above it. Half the bulbs were dead, so they were caught in some kind of darkness. Then, 10 steps behind them though, the two masked men were altering their course the same way, and they turned like a rolling tide. You see that? I asked. Hayes squinted. The sheriff stood by the dunk tank, towel over his shoulder, laughing with the volunteers. The mother glanced back, tightening her grip on the girl, and started to move faster. Then the tall guys went turbo and quickly closed the distance in a second. They flanked the girls and had them cornered before I knew it. I vaulted the booth and ran. I heard Hayes swear and then followed me. It smelled like candy and popcorn, which was comforting in the moment, but my body was running on pure adrenaline. It was this really weird contrast in the moment. They had the woman up against the wall, her arm across the child, one man leaning up close. When I got closer, the mask wasn't this sloppily crafted thing. It was smooth and chalky, hairline cracks spidering that painted grin. Not a single inch of skin was exposed anywhere, despite all the long, creepy limbs. "Hey, back off," I said. They ignored me. The second man shifted so he could block the view. Hayes quickly grabbed up a folding chair and made like he was going to take a swing. One of the creeps turned around, but really only turning his head all the way around, almost like an owl would, and I couldn't believe what I was watching. Hayes then swung for real, wrestler, no-nonsense kid, and flecks fell from the mask like powder. Under it was the same paste, impacted now, like that's what his face was actually made of. I hooked the girls and hauled off. They folded into me, heavy with fear. The man's hand slid off the mother's shoulders and left this gray smear on her blouse. The guy blocking us snapped this long arm at Hayes and caught his wrist. I heard Hayes scream. The elbow flexed and hyperextended, whatever you call it, and Hayes was reeling with pain. I kicked the man's shin, and I fully blasted him. I heard him grunt and he let Hayes go. Then all of us retreated back to that ring toss booth. We pushed back into Maine. The crowd turned toward the noise now. A dad in a ball cap ran up with his hands balled up. A vendor grabbed this metal ladle like a weapon. Our principal then charged through, palms out, barking orders. Soon, a little posse of defenders had formed and started to circle those two guys. The tall men moved in these short, rapid steps that ate up the distance quickly. It was almost like watching crabs walk. One of them hit the deputy who had sprinted over from the dunk tank. He knocked the officer into the bushes and then jumped on top of him, blows raining down. I was closest, I started to move in, which ended up being a big mistake. The second tall man slapped me in the ribs unbelievably hard. I can't even explain how. Pain then flared up and I doubled over. It was almost like getting hit with a brick. Hayes hauled me up and dragged me back to the booth, and the others cut in and circled. The little girl was now sobbing, and the mother kept whispering to her that it's okay. People flooded the alley and froze when they saw the faces. They didn't have weapons or anything, it was just how creepy they looked up close. People were calling for them to freeze, hold up, stand down, but nothing was getting through to them. They resorted to threats and still didn't get any kind of response. A folding chair then arced through the air, pinged off one of the masked men. The guy didn't stumble an inch though, and they moved toward the park end of Maine where the pines stood tall and dark. A plastic perimeter fence ran the end of the line, and the men didn't jump it, they slipped through the gaps, just off the ground, bodies flattening and sliding. The fence didn't make a sound as they passed through it. A deputy fired off into the tree line, a shot that cracked and vanished into the pines. Then, noise rushed back, a generator stuttered, people screamed. We couldn't believe this idiot had just discharged a firearm, but after seeing that, I guess I don't really blame him. The mother sank to the curb, cradling her baby. Her blouse had that gray streak that flaked when she moved. The sheriff took everything in and barked out orders. Cones went up, police tape, radios. He tried drunks in masks, and it sounded weak. The deputy had gotten beaten down and didn't make eye contact with anybody. The statements had come in, they were tall and local. They weren't human, the mask wouldn't come off. Somebody swore they heard a laugh and it sounded robotic, and others said there'd been no sound at all when they came in. It had everybody on this Men in Black thing for a while. EMTs would ice Hayes' elbow and taped it up. They checked me and pressed a cold pack to my ribs. They wrapped the girl up in a foil blanket and coaxed her into sipping a bottle of water. She kept staring at the alley mouth, eyes blown wide like somebody had seen the other side of reality. By the time they got lights and bodies ready to search, the pines had already swallowed up any sign of them. The perimeter fence looked intact unless you peered up close, where a faint gray dust would paint some of the gaps. The sheriff closed the festival down early, pack up, lock it down, post cars. He ordered more lights, officers, and volunteers. People would nod along, but it was really bizarre to watch. I could tell nobody really knew what to do, so they were primed to buy into anything. We left in groups, and I walked home with Hayes and some other kids. My ribs still kind of burned. Hayes kept rubbing his elbow as if checking whether the joint would hold up for him. At home, I scrubbed that gray from my palms until the water ran clean. There was a weird chalky smell everywhere that they touched me. To my knowledge, nobody ever saw them again. The town added patrols and light. The festival committee bought metal detectors. Nobody really knew why. The alley got a no loitering sign. People would try to call it a prank or a stunt, but I don't think it really stuck. Even the jokers walked straighter down the middle of the sidewalk now. Nobody wanted to get blamed for it. The sheriff stood in front of the courthouse steps the next morning, told the local paper it had been a couple of masked drunks, hopped up and looking for trouble. That was the official line, and he stuck to it. But everybody who had actually been there, the mothers clutching their kids, the dads who had charged in and been thrown aside, the high schoolers nursing their bruises, we all knew better. They seen the way those men moved, the way the masks cracked without coming off, the way the festival completely fell apart. Nobody said it out loud, but nobody bought the story either, and from then on, the festival committee approved floodlights at every corner. Volunteers would patrol, bag checks at the gates. Security tripled for every parade, every fair, and every market. And I guess, what else can you really do? The air currently had that brittleness to it, the kind that you really only get when fall is past its peak and winter's waiting around the corner. Clay and I had been on the ranch since sunup, checking trowels, tightening wire, hauling scrap out of the pastures before snow turned it all into hidden hazards. That was the job this time of year though, tidy the edges, put things in order, make sure nothing came back to bite you when the ground froze and the herds got mean. The cattle weren't where they should have been. They drifted to the south side, bunched together, leaving the northern pasture strangely empty. Animals seem to know things before men do, and I took their absence as some kind of sign, though I didn't say it out loud. Clay seemed to notice it too. He made a joke about it, something about lazy cows, but I caught the way his eyes kept flicking to the end of the property line, where the cottonwood stood gray against the sky. We'd been told to leave that edge alone. Old man Mathers, who owned the spread, was really clear about it. Fix what needs fixing, but don't go looking for work where it don't call to you, he'd said, with that kind of weight too. Neither of us asked any questions. You don't when the man's signing your checks and prefers a quiet room. But work has this weird way of pulling you towards trouble sometimes. A section of the fence was down, wire sagging into the dirt, posts leaning over from the rod. We could have left it for another day, sure, but the light was thinning, and both of us knew an open fence line was a risk that we couldn't really afford. Coyotes, strays, anything could slip through. So we rode out on the north boundary, tools in the bed of the truck, trailing dust behind us. I remember the moment thinking something felt weird, like crossing over into sacred ground, but I told myself it's just the season, the cold, the shadows of dawn. Still, that feeling in my gut had the truth nailed down already, before I even knew it. By the time we reached the far edge, the sky was beginning its slow collapse into dusk. Clay cut the engine, and for a few seconds, nobody moved. I took stock the way I always do, listening, measuring, noting what stood out. Out here, the silence was loud. No birds, no crickets, no cough of cattle, just wind in the brush. We stepped down and walked the fence line, boots crunching over the frost-hardened weeds. The wire had snapped clean at one post, leaving a gap wide enough for almost anything short of a bull to wander through. Clay muttered about how long it would take to set new posts, and I was only half listening. My attention was locked on a smell. It wasn't manure or brush fire or anything you'd normally associate with ranch work. This was coppery, rank, decay sitting heavy in the back of my throat. I followed it. 20 feet into the grass, I found the cow. She wasn't one of ours though. The brand mark was unfamiliar, burned deep into her hide, half hidden beneath the tearing. She'd been mauled. Ribs were split apart, belly torn open, tongue lolling off gray and stiff. Coyotes had done some of the work, but not all of it. I crouched close enough to see the edges of the wounds, jagged but not clean. I made a note about the drag marks heading further off into the brush as well. Jesus Christ, Clay said behind me, pulling his bandana up over his nose. That ain't ours, is it? No, I answered back. The brand's from over by Gunnison's place, I think, a couple of miles out. We stood over her for a minute, neither of us really eager to admit what it meant. A dead cow wasn't unusual, but one mauled this close to the line with no signs of a predator lingering set me on edge. Animals don't take cattle down this way unless they're desperate or unless something else is in play. Free-range cows are meaner than hell, and they don't really make for an easy kill. Clay said we should just patch up the fence and go, leave the carcass for the scavengers. I almost agreed with him, and then I saw the boot. It jutted out of the brush like earth had spit it up. Leather cracked, and I froze. Clay followed my stare. We didn't speak. You don't really when you see something like that. I grabbed hold and pulled up. The ground gave up its secret slowly. First, the leg, stiff and heavy, then the rest. A body, half buried in leaf litter, chewed in places the way the cow had been. The face was gone, stripped down to bone, hands curled tight, frozen in this clawing gesture. He'd fought to the very end. Clay cursed again and turned away like he might vomit. I continued to look. My habit is to take in the details even when I don't want to. The clothes were ranch clothes, denim, wool, boots worn thin from saddle work. He wasn't carrying a wallet, or if he had, the scavengers had taken it. No obvious marks of identification, just another working man, cut down and left where nobody could find him. A sharp sound then broke the moment. I spun, a hand on the knife in my belt. Out from the tree line, a horse stood there, watching us. She was in rough shape, coat dulled, ribs showing, mane tangled up into knots. Still saddled, stirrups hanging loose. The reins were trailing in the dirt. She looked ready to bolt, but too tired to commit to it. Her eyes were rolling white in that low light. Clay breathed out shaky, collecting himself. That's his, right? It has to be, he said, nodding at the corpse, then at the horse. His hand came to rest on the revolver on his waist. I mean, it made sense. A cow strays through a broken fence, a hired hand saddles up to fetch it. Somewhere along the line, everything goes wrong. The cow ends up gutted, the rider ends up dead, the horse wanders until hunger and exhaustion drag her back. That was the story the scene wanted us to believe, and boy, was it believable. We circled slowly, careful to not spook the animal. I kept my hands low, talking softly. Eventually, she let me grab the reins. The leather was cracked and stiff. I checked the saddle for marks, a brand, stamp, tag, but nothing. Whoever owned her had made no mark. Honestly, we probably should have left it at that. Should have taken the horse and the corpse back to Mathers, called it in. Let the sheriff sort out all these details, but something continued to gnaw at me. I personally wanted confirmation, needed it even. So I told Clay that we had to go back to the body. He didn't really seem to like the idea, but he followed me. We stood over the dead man again, both of us swallowing against the stench, the buzzing flies that clung to him even in the cold. I crouched down and examined the wounds more closely. The teeth marks were obvious, but they weren't the only marks. I pushed aside the torn jacket, holes, small, round, and ragged at the edges. Not made by claws or tusks, but definitely bullet holes. Clear as day. They ran through the chest, peppered up with the ribs. I counted 3. Then I looked at his skull, or what was left of it. The top was gone, shattered clean through. I didn't really need to be a coroner to recognize the truth. Yeah, this wasn't animals, I said. Clay blinked at me, then looked closer for himself. His face drained white. Jesus, is that a bullet hole in his head? He was shot, then left out here. Coyotes just cleaned up what was left, I surmised. We found ourselves standing there in silence once more, the weight of it all choking any more discussion. The questions started stacking up in my head. Who was he? Why would somebody kill him out here, in the scrub at the edge of Mathers land? Why leave the horse saddled, wandering around? Clay was the first to break the silence. "We need to go," he said, and he actually sounded kind of scared. I agreed. This wasn't just a dead hand and a stray cow anymore. This was straight up murder. And murder has a way of spreading, if you know what I mean. We hauled the horse along, neither of us talking now. The fence remained broken, wires sagging, tools untouched from where we dropped them off. The work didn't really matter anymore. What matters was getting back before somebody saw us out here and maybe shot us too. The wind picked up behind us as we walked, carrying with it the rustle of brush, the shifting of shadows. I kept my eyes moving, checking the tree line, the ground, the space behind us. Once you find a body riddled with bullets, you can't help but wonder if the shooter is still nearby, watching his work, waiting to see if somebody can find it. By the time we reached the truck, my nerves were shot. Clay got the horse loaded, as we just happened to have space in the horse trailer, while I continued to scan the horizon. The land around us was quiet and still. We drove back without really speaking, and finally, the ranch house lights came into view, warm and steady, but they didn't feel like safety, not with the knowledge that we now carried. We called it in as soon as we made it back to the house. Mathers didn't ask questions, just dialed the sheriff with that flat tone of his. Clay and I sat on the porch, watching the horse pace circles around the hitching post, thin and restless. Her eyes seemed to roll back every time the wind shifted. She didn't want to be here any more than we did. The deputies arrived just before sundown. They wanted us to lead them back out there, walk them straight to the body, the cow, the fence. So we did. It felt different now, going back. The land had now turned mean in the dark. Every tree bent like it wanted to fall on us. The body was still there, exactly where we left it, but something about him seemed smaller now, almost like he'd sunk deeper into the earth, half swallowed in just a handful of hours. The deputies said very little. They took photos, collected casings, though I never saw them bag anything. One deputy had checked the horse back at the house, running his hands down her legs, checking the teeth. "She's been out here a lot longer than a day," he muttered. "Closer to a week, I'd say." That didn't sit right. A week alone, saddled and trailing reins, and nobody had noticed her until now? We thought we saw everything out there. We gave our statements and left nothing out. Still, when I looked in their faces, I could tell they were already burying it in paperwork. "Some kind of accidental shooting," one said later. "Even though I don't know how you explain to put 3 rounds in a man's chest and then 1 through his skull by accident. Probably some drunks pot shooting in the brush, and this unlucky fellow was standing there, taking a leak or something." The investigation stretched on through November. A few strangers came and went, state men, not locals. They brought clipboards, asked pretty much the same questions. circled around the horse like they held some kind of key. At one point, they shaved her mane down to the skin, looking for marks. Clay swore that he saw a scar under the hair, a brand that had been burned over to erase it. They wouldn't let us close enough to confirm, though. Then there was the matter of the boots. The coroner swore the tread pattern didn't match anything sold locally, not in the country, maybe not in the state. Imported, he said. Military issue or foreign exchange. Some of the details were really weird to me, but what do I know? After I started keeping a notebook, dates, details, odd scraps in the investigators that they clearly ignored, like the .223 shell that we found near the fence post 3 days after they supposedly combed the area, or the way the dead cow's brand didn't line up with any registered inside county records. Close but off, almost like it had been imitated. Clay told me I should burn the notebook, forget it, but I continued to write. By December, the case was cold. The official word was a trespassing drifter, cause unknown. The horse went unclaimed and sold at auction. I still can't shake what I saw. A body shot to pieces, boots that didn't belong, a horse half starved, and a cow that shouldn't have been there at all. It was like some kind of bad airport novel. Occasionally, sometimes when I ride out to that far fence line, I swear the air still carries that same copper tang. The cattle won't even graze there. Clay won't drive past it. I keep my notes, but not holding my breath. The road narrowed to little more than a cracked ribbon laid across the countryside. The map had promised this scenic drive, best leaf color this side of the country. But it was more isolation than really anything else. Acres of oaks and maples pressed in closely, their leaves showing off in this fire red, orange, and gold, while the blacktop wound us deeper into nowhere. "You're obsessed," my boyfriend said, smirking at me from the driver's seat. "All this for a photo shoot. We could have stayed in town taking pictures in front of the coffee shop pumpkins or something." I shot him a look. "Pumpkins don't count. This is about color, about the change. You'll see, the light hits just right out here." He shook his head, amused, but I saw the corners of his mouth twitching like he was holding back something sweeter than sarcasm. That was him, though, half teasing, half there just because he liked being around me. The windows were down, the air was cool enough to nip at my cheeks, carrying that sharp smell of wet leaves and faint musk of river water. I snapped a few pictures out the passenger window while he drove, barns fading behind us, power lines disappearing. When the road dropped us at this river crossing, I knew this was the spot. An old bridge, paint peeled to rust, spanning the water. The current below us was running hard, white caps breaking against the boulders midstream. I leaned forward in my seat. "Stop here." He eased the car into the shoulder. We got out and I felt the air grow colder near the water. The sun was dipping behind a cloud cover, draining the warmth. "Perfect," I said, lifting my phone. I framed the shot, trees reflecting the racing water, sky darkening, branches stretching out like veins. "Hold on, I'll get closer." He vaulted the guardrail before I could protest, his shoes scraping up against the rocks as he picked his way down the bank. "Careful," I called out. He grinned back up at me, cocky as always. "Relax, babe, I'm fine." I lowered the phone, heart ticking a little faster. "Seriously, it's slick down there. Just stay where you are." He waved me off, stepping onto this mossy rock that was jutting into the water. He was aiming for an angle shot, a dramatic one, the one that would blow all my pictures out of the water. He crouched, phone in hand, adjusting. Then came the sound of a sharp crack of wood giving way. His foot slid, his arms pinwheeled, and before I could scream, he was gone, splashed hard into the river. I screamed out for him. He bobbed up, coughing, arms flailing as the current grabbed him like a toy. He tried to fight, tried to angle back toward the bank, but the water was going really fast. I sprinted over to the guardrail, clutching the cold steel, eyes locked on his head as it spun downstream. I yelled out, telling him to hold on. But he was already being pulled away, dragged under the bridge, vanishing around the bend. I vaulted the guardrail and slid down the bank, knees buckling on that wet slope. Dead leaves and roots tore underneath my hands. The ground tilted toward the water so steeply, it felt like gravity had a personal grudge against me. "Babe!" I shouted, though the river was swallowing my words. The water was roaring loud down here, rushing over the rocks around the bends, carrying him further and further. I stumbled along the bank, crashing through the brush, following the brief flashes of his jacket between the trees before it disappeared. The trail, if you could call it that, was little more than a deer path, branches slapping at my arms, thorns catching in my jeans. My feet slipped on slick moss and wet soil, but I pushed harder, lungs tearing out in that cold air. Every second stretched with the thought of his head going under and not coming back up. Half a mile down, the river slowed into this wide bend, logs jammed together in the shallows, leaves spinning in the eddies. I stumbled out of the trees, scanning and praying. I saw movement at the water's edge. I lurched forward, thinking it was him, but it wasn't. The shape broke from the brush with a snort, squat and heavy, bristled hair slick with mud. It was a wild hog, big, maybe a couple 100 pounds, tusks curving like knives, eyes dark and mean. Another shape behind it, smaller but just as ugly. I froze, my brain still clawing to save him, stuttering to a stop in the sight though. The hog was pawing at the ground, shoulders rolling. It wasn't curious, it was pissed. Then I saw why. Off to the side, half hidden in the brush, lay the torn carcass of a deer. Its ribcage had been open like a bag of chips. The air stank of blood, thick and coppery, riding on the cold river wind. My stomach flipped. The hog's had a kill and it was standing on top of it. The big one squealed and my ears rang. Then it charged me. I turned and bolted, my feet barely even finding any traction in that mud. But the sound of it, hooves pounding, brush snapping, it was right behind me. I pumped my legs harder than they ever had before, lungs searing with fire. I cut left along the bank, branches clawing at my arms again. The hog crashed through it like they weren't even there, and its scream tore in the air closer and closer. I risked a glance back when I saw the flash of tusks. Mud sprang off its legs. Adrenaline spiked hot then, and I screamed. The ground then sloped down into the water. I slid and my feet got tangled, knees cracking into rock. Pain quickly shot up my leg, but I scrambled forward, hands clawing through the mud and the weeds. The hog skidded behind me, spraying earth. I scrambled up this half-rotted log that angled over the water, my hands burning on the rough bark, splinters biting in deep. The hog then rammed the log from below, the impact rattling my bones. I nearly pitched forward into the current myself. It backed up, snorted, and came again, and the log shuddered underneath me. I clung hard though, knuckles white, whispering nonsense prayers to myself, trying not to scream again. Another impact. The log cracked, part of it splintering. My boot slipped, my chest smashed up against the bark. I kicked down blindly, my heel connecting with the snout. It squealed, stumbled back a foot, and that was something, I guess. I shoved myself higher onto that log though, scrambling to the far side. My jeans tore open on a branch. The hog bellowed and circled, mud flying, but I didn't wait for it to come again. I leapt off the log and into the shallow water. The shock of the cold knifed through me. I splashed forward, stumbling, falling to my knees, scrambling back up, anything to put distance between us. The hog gave chase, crashing into the water behind me. Its bulk slowed down just enough for me to reach a cluster of rocks at midstream. I hauled myself up, scraping skin raw on jagged edges. The hog lurked in the shadows, glaring, huffing clouds of steam off into the cold air. It paced and splashed, but didn't climb the rocks. The smaller one had joined it now, squealing, teeth snapping at the air. They guarded their ground, the kill behind them. I stood there shivering, shoes heavy with river water, staring across the bend like I'd woken up in hell. Then a sound cut through the river's roar, coughing. I spun, eyes darting upstream. 50 yards away, tangled up in another mess of driftwood, was him, my boyfriend, half sprawled out on a log, choking up water, dragging himself toward the shallows. Relief tore through me. "I'm here!" I screamed to him. He lifted his head, dazed, confused, but eyes unfocused. I risked one last look at the hogs. They stood right where they were, watching, the big one grunting, ears twitching. Satisfied I was leaving, or maybe just too lazy to press any further. Either way, they didn't follow as I slipped off the rocks and staggered upstream. I half ran, half fell across mud and rock until I finally reached him. He was soaked, shaking, lips pale as paper. His breath was coming rattling out of him, but he was alive. I collapsed onto my knees beside him, grabbing his arm, pulling him up. "Don't you dare," I whispered. though I wasn't even sure what I meant. Don't die or don't scare me like that again. Because honestly, he looked like a corpse. He coughed, spat out some water, and then managed to say, I told you you get your shot. It was a half joke, half delirium, but I clutched him and never wanted to let go. I hooked my arm underneath his and pulled, our feet sucking at the mud. He staggered upright, teeth chattering, his weight heavy against me. Every step felt burrowed, like the river could come back and claim him at any second. Behind us came another squeal, though, high and furious. I twisted and the hogs were in fact following. First the smaller one, weaving through the brush, then the bigger. They weren't going to let us slip away so easy, I guess. Move, I hissed to him, yanking him forward. We stumbled along the bank, crashing through brittle weeds and thorny undergrowth. My lungs were screaming for air, but fear shoved me a little faster. The hogs continued to tear after us. I could almost feel them at my back, the ground trembling even. One wrong step, one stumble, and they'd be on top of us. The slope ahead led up to the road. I dragged him, half hauling, half shoving, until we clawed over the lip and onto the asphalt again. The car waited 20 yards up, silver hood catching what little light remained. Go, go, my voice cracked. We limped, slipped, and shoved ourselves forward. Behind us, the hog scrambled up the bank, squealing, eyes glinting with rage. The bigger one hit the pavement like a tank. It charged, closing in the distance fast. I fumbled my keys out from my pocket. The car beeped as I slammed the unlock button. I ripped the door open, shoved him inside, and then dove across the seat as that hog continued to thunder closer. That beast rammed the bumper with a bone-shaking crash. The whole car jolted, glass rattling in its frame. I screamed and jammed the locks. The hog then backed up, snorted, and slammed into the side panel, denting the metal with its skull. The smaller one just squealed and circled. Start it! Start it! He croaked beside me, but my hands were shaking. It took 2 tries before the engine finally roared to life. I threw into gear and floored the pedal. The tires screamed, gravel spraying as we lurched forward. The hogs continued to give chase for 20 yards before dropping back. The bigger one planting itself in the middle of the road, watching us vanish away. I didn't slow down until the bridge was at least a mile behind us. He sat slumped in the passenger seat, shivering, eyes hollow. I gripped the wheel so tight my knuckles were aching. Outside the window, the October woods blurred into streaks of fire-colored leaves. They didn't look beautiful anymore. They almost looked like warning signs that we've been too dumb to read. There isn't a heroic follow-up to the story either. We left with our tails tucked firmly behind us. Didn't call the police, game wardens, or even go to the hospital. What could we say or do? That a wild animal scared the shit out of us? There's not really any kind of help for that.
Iowa is one of those places I can feel a bit cut off from society. My town was literally a school, a grocery store, a gas station, a post office, and a barn that was converted into a roller rink with a population of about 900. For the sake of the story, I'll refer to the town as Outpost 19. I was 17 when this happened, in my senior year of high school. My best friend, Jerry, had moved to Cedar Rapids because his parents had gotten divorced and his mom received full custody, at least until he was 18. Jerry had been dating a girl who lived at Outpost 19. So every weekend, he would make the hour drive back into town to see his dad, hang out with his girlfriend, and if he had time, we would meet up and have a beer. This was the routine for about a year. I remember when this story happened. Graduation was approaching, but the school year wasn't quite over yet. One weekend, Jerry came back into town like usual, but his girlfriend was on vacation with her family, so we decided to go cruising around. We considered making a stop at the roller rink, but quickly dismissed that idea. Since it was a Saturday night, a bunch of kids would be there, so we literally end up just driving around and throwing empty beer bottles at road signs. Around this time period, I'd picked up some part-time work at the local grocery store, restocking inventory on weeknights. Point being, I would listen to crime podcasts and creepypastas during my shifts. There was one story called The Showers that really stuck with me. The story was about a guy who went on a witch hunt through the back roads of Nebraska, searching for a mysterious building that his teacher told him about, only to discover something truly horrifying lurking within the structure. Nebraska and Iowa share very similar landscapes, and the way the author described the setting reminded me a lot of the prairies and farmlands surrounding Outpost 19. Since Jerry and I were bored enough to be driving around aimlessly, I suggested that we try to go somewhere that looked abandoned and check it out, withholding that I had gotten the idea from a creepypasta I heard on YouTube. Truth be told, we had never really done too much exploring outside of our hometown. Sure, we had gone fishing in the nearby rivers, and as kids, would play manhunt in the cornfields, but we never went snooping around someone else's property. I guess we were bored enough to take the risks that night. So we drove around a bit, until we came upon a dirt road that was situated between two cornfields, which led up to what looked like a two-story barn. There were absolutely no lights on anywhere, just the moon and the headlights on Jerry's truck, which I suggested he shut off before turning onto the dirt road. We moved slowly and carefully along the dirt road until we reached the barn house at the end. I was geeking out on the inside because this was literally just like the story, but we had no idea if this barn house was actually abandoned. We could have been shot at by some angry farmer for trespassing, but there wasn't a soul in sight. So Jerry turned his truck around to face the dirt road and killed the engine. If we had to make a quick getaway, at least the truck would be facing in the right direction. We then got out of the truck and made our way toward the barn. As I said before, there were no lights anywhere on this property. But in the moonlight, I saw one of those galvanized windmills, a couple of water troughs that were dumped over, and a silo next to the barn. This place looked like it was a cattle ranch. But where were all the animals? I guess there was only one way to find out. There were a few wooden doors on the side of the barn that we tried to open, but each one was locked. So we made our way to the giant double doors that were in the very front of the building, and to our surprise, they swung right open. We immediately noticed that there was a faint glow coming from several areas within the building. I quickly realized that it was candlelight. Jerry had brought along a flashlight, but said that he wouldn't turn it on unless he absolutely needed to, as to not give away our position to the aforementioned angry farmer with a gun. But even with the candlelight, it was impossible to see inside this building. That's when I got this sinking feeling, telling me that we should leave right away. Jerry turned on his flashlight and shined it into the building. There were several candelabras placed on tables and railings throughout the foyer. The layout was almost like a wedding venue. We didn't see anyone, but someone had to have lit all these candles. We then noticed what looked like an altar in the center of the room. There was an unspoken thing between Jerry and I. We were going to have to see what was on this altar. And as we got closer, I saw a large knife between two candlesticks that had been stabbed into something. We had to get a bit closer to see what it was, and we soon discovered what looked like a dead lamb. Jerry, I think it's time to leave. Now. We booked it back to the truck, got in, and started it up. I took one last look behind us before we sped off back down the dirt road. I shit you not, I could see several figures standing outside the barn, and we even heard something hitting the tailgate of the truck before we peeled out of there. We had to GPS our way back to Outpost 19. I would say it took about 30 minutes to get back there. We didn't tell anyone about what happened because we didn't want to get into trouble for trespassing. There was a small dent on Jerry's tailgate. We assumed that one of the people I saw outside the barn must have thrown a rock or something. I lived at Outpost 19 for another year before I moved to Des Moines to work in construction. And a year after that, my parents retired and moved away as well, so there's no reason for me to return to that town ever again. I've tried to research any dairy or cattle farms located outside Outpost 19, but I can't be sure if any of them were the place that we were at that night. It was quite dark, and the place could look completely different during the day. I've heard rumors that many satanic cults have compounds in secluded areas of Iowa. This is only a guess, but I think we stumbled into one of these compounds that night and interrupted some kind of ritual that was taking place in that barn. During my early 20s, I worked as a meter reader in Iowa City. A meter reader is someone who records how much electricity, gas, or water you've used each month. If your meters are on the inside and you want an accurate bill, a meter reader must enter your home, whether you're there or not, to let them in. As a side note, we only enter houses if consent was given when the customer first signs up for the service. Customers also provide us with keys if necessary. Entering a home when the owner is not present is something that I've never gotten used to. No matter how loudly I knock, I can never shake this uneasy feeling that I wasn't welcome there. The inside of a home is the ultimate private space. A home's exterior is just the image of ourselves that we project to the rest of the world. However, the further you venture inside, the closer you come to truly seeing what kind of person lives there. And if you want the raw, unfiltered truth, head for the basement. I hate basements. I've seen walls that look like giant static-filled TV screens, until I realized it was roaches scurrying across a white background, cobwebs so thick it looked like a cotton candy machine had exploded. I've seen rats, snakes, feces, weapons, neglected children, abused pets, homeless squatters, massive hordes, bizarre sexual items, a makeshift meth lab, and even a coffin. There are rational explanations for all these things. Well, maybe not the coffin. But there was one basement where I found something that was beyond the grasp of logic, and that's what made it so terrifying. It was at an old apartment house. From the outside, it looked like any other home on the block. I entered the back door and found myself at the top of a staircase. I ran my hand along the wall until I grazed a light switch. I flipped the switch, but no lights turned on. I wasn't carrying a flashlight. A typical route for me involved 5 or 6 hours of walking, so I tried to carry as little as possible. Oftentimes, I would use a light from my handheld screen, but it only illuminated whatever was about a foot in front of it. It was essentially the world's worst lantern. I aimed it and made my way down into the darkness. Once at the bottom, I blindly shuffled across the room, one baby step at a time. With arms outstretched and head down, I eventually made it to the far side of the basement. I shined the dim light from my handheld along the wall and discovered 2 doors. Each door led into its own small room. I chose the one on the right and found the meters in the far corner. As I entered the data, I began hearing noises coming from the other room. Something was moving around in there, and there was some whimpering that grew louder the longer I listened. I eventually realized it was a dog. It sounded weak and distressed. I tried to open the door, but it was locked. At this point, the dog was scratching on the other side. I felt helpless. I reported it when I got back to the office, but I couldn't shake the thought of that dog being trapped down there in that basement. It stuck with me over the next month until it was time to return. So there I was, in the same place a month later, back inside that dark basement. At least this time, I knew where the meters were located. I shuffled back to those small rooms and entered the one on the right, while carefully listening for any sounds that may come from the other room. This time I heard nothing. I read the meters and started making my way back, but I couldn't shake that memory of the dog. Was it still trapped inside that room? Curiosity got the best of me. I stood outside the door for a few moments, just listening, but heard nothing. That's when I made a huge mistake. I tried to open the door. I had barely jiggled the doorknob when I first heard it. It was a blood-curdling scream, unlike anything I have ever heard. It was a sound that I didn't think a human was capable of producing. Short, piercing, high-pitched shrieks, followed by abruptly low, drawn-out, guttural moans. That ultimately morphed into something that I can only describe as crying, but much louder. It was all over the place, some sort of psychotic, free-form jazz. I stumbled backwards, nearly losing my balance. I shouted something like, "Hello? Who's in there?" But there was no response, just more screaming. "Are you okay? Do you need help?" Still no response. The screaming continued. There was no doubt that whoever was in there heard me. Apparently they didn't want my help at all. They just wanted me gone. So I fumbled my way through the dark room, toward the exit. When I got to the top of the stairs, I just stood there, listening. I was trying to wrap my mind around what I was hearing. I waited for the screaming to stop, but it never did. When I finally left, it was still as loud and demented as it was when it began. I felt relieved, but that quickly vanished when I realized I had to do it all over again next month. I reported what I heard, but nothing came of it. As my return drew near, a sense of dread began to grow inside of me. What kind of lunatic sits alone in total darkness and silence? My mind created endless explanations of what kind of hell was beyond that door. By the time I returned, I had built them up in my mind so much that anyone other than Lucifer himself would have been a letdown. But there was no sign of anyone, or even over the next several months. I had nearly given up on solving the mystery when a stroke of luck pulled me back in. One night, I went to a concert with my friend, Laura. After the show, I gave her a ride home. She moved somewhat recently, so she had to give me directions. I didn't really pay much attention to where she was leading me, until she pointed to a house a ways up the street. I couldn't believe it. She had moved into the house with a mysterious room in the basement. This is going to sound weird, but have you ever noticed anything odd about the basement at this? Before I could even finish my sentence, she blurted out, "Some crazy guy lives down there." Finally, I had confirmation. She went on to tell me that even though her apartment was located in the attic, she often heard him yelling late at night. But that wasn't all. She had actually met him. One day, While walking to her car, she saw him standing in the lawn. He was perfectly still, with no expression on his face. He was directly in her path, so she cautiously made her way around him. He was staring at her, so she offered a friendly hello as she passed. He had no reaction, except for one unsettling exception. He stuck his tongue out at her, then quickly sucked it back into his mouth, then resumed acting like a statue. Thoroughly creeped out, she got in her car and drove away. It was about 2 or 3 months later when I finally met him. I entered the back door, like I had so many months before, but this time something was different. There was a light on down in the basement. I peered down the staircase. At the bottom, a ragged-looking dog was staring back at me. It was the same dog I had heard during my first visit. Then, I noticed something else. Behind the dog, I could see a pair of bare feet. The ceiling blocked my view of whoever was standing there, but it didn't matter. I knew it was him. I should have left right then, but I didn't. I know this probably doesn't make any sense, but at this point, my desire to finally get some answers outweighed my fear. I called out, "Hello? It's the meter reader." I then began to make my descent. As I made my way down, more of him was revealed to me, slowly. He looked to be middle-aged. His head was shaved. His eyes were wild. He was wearing pants, but no shirt. What I remember the most about him was how lean and sinewy his body looked. It looked like the body of a person that was never at rest. I explained to him who I was and what I was doing there. And to my surprise, not only did he talk to me, but he acted and sounded somewhat normal. The volume and pitch of his voice was odd, but he said the same sorts of things that people typically say to meter readers. I even started to doubt whether or not he was the same man I had heard screaming. But his behavior slowly removed any doubts. As I read the meters, he rapidly paced back and forth. He was constantly wringing his hands together and sporadically cocking his head from one side to the other. The longer he talked, the more agitated he became. He began grimacing, and little verbal tics started popping up in his speech. Every so often he would blurt out, "Aw," in the middle of a sentence. He was trying his best to suppress these sounds, but he was losing that battle. I started to make my way toward the exit, and he followed. His verbal outbursts grew louder and more frequent. I was becoming petrified. When I got to the stairs, our conversation came to an end, and I said goodbye. As I turned to head up the staircase, he could no longer hold back, and he began screaming. The very same unforgettable screams I had heard coming from the locked room. I ran up the stairs as fast as my legs would carry me, flung open the door, and rushed back into the daylight. A couple of months later, I had some friends over my place, including Laura. I was excited to tell her about my encounter, but as I was relaying what happened, I could tell that something else was on her mind. When I finished telling my story, she told me about something that she had seen a couple of weeks earlier. One day, she noticed flashing lights outside her window. When she looked outside, she saw a couple of police officers placing the man from the basement in the back seat of a squad car. She later found out from another tenant that he had attacked someone with a knife. That was the last we ever saw of him. I don't know what became of the man in the basement. I'd like to think that he got the help he needed, but maybe that's just because I'd rather not think about the alternative. When I was 15, I was a bit of a daredevil and was full of that dumb teenage bravado. Living in a small town in Iowa, it got really boring sometimes. So all it took was a simple dare from one of my friends to spend the night at the local bowling alley, to have me sneaking up one of the drop ceiling tiles in the men's restroom, waiting until the place emptied out, then drop down to explore the empty building, like some kind of urban explorer. This would have been around 2005. I knew if I went through with it, rumors would begin to circulate around school, and I would be the cool kid for a while. As pathetic as that sounds, that was our version of clout in those days. We picked a Friday night. As I mentioned before, the entry point was the men's restroom. The ceiling tiles above one of the stalls popped loose easily enough. I had scoped it out during open bowling night the week before. I shimmied up with a small flashlight and crawled onto a wooden platform by the AC ducting and waited. The leagues ran late that night, but by 11 p.m., the last stragglers were gone. The lights were dimmed, and the place became as quiet as a tomb. When I didn't hear any more footsteps, music, or people talking, I pried the tile aside and lowered myself down. I came out of the restroom to an empty building. It was dead quiet. My heart was beating out of my chest because I wasn't entirely sure if all the employees had gone home yet, so I cautiously made my way down the lanes. Slowly. After walking down the length of the building and just kind of stood there for about 10 minutes, I figured I was alone. I didn't hear anything. So then I started to get a little cocky and headed toward the back, past the vending machines, through the door marked employees only, which led to the machines behind the lanes. I had always wondered what they looked like. The pin setter room was narrow and hot. I shined my flashlight around and saw a bunch of metal arms and chains. Pretty underwhelming, to be honest. But that's when I saw something. There was a tall shape standing motionless by the emergency exit. At first, I thought it was a mannequin, but then it moved. I didn't expect anyone to be back there, so I had made it no effort to conceal myself. The figure stepped into my light. It was a man, wearing a dark jacket, and I saw in his hand he was holding a single bowling pin by the neck, like a club. I froze. My brain screamed at me to run, but my legs wouldn't move. When he took another step toward me, I bolted. I ran back through the door, across the open floor. I could hear him behind me, his boots thudding against the ground. "I'll fucking kill you," he shouted. I didn't look back. I just sprinted toward the restrooms. Thankfully, there was also a bar and a dining area near where the restrooms were. From his vantage point, he wouldn't be able to tell which one I had fled to once I rounded the corner. However, I saw a row of wooden stools against the wall. I grabbed one of the stools and hurled it toward him as hard as I could. It caught him in the leg, causing him to fall, and he went down hard. I didn't wait to see if he got back up. I sprinted into the men's room, yanked open the stall door, and hauled myself back into the ceiling, the tile snapping back into place just as I heard the restroom door burst open. I could hear him below me, pacing, muttering. At first, it was just heavy breathing. Then he spoke. "I'm gonna find you. I'll bash your head in." I pressed myself flat, barely breathing. Dust got in my nose and I had to stop myself from sneezing. The next thing the man said was disturbing. "You killed her. I know you killed my daughter. She was right here. And you took her from me." My blood went cold. Daughter? I didn't know what he was talking about. I hadn't killed anyone. He kept going on like that, voice rising and falling, like he was arguing with himself. "You'll pay for it. I'm gonna make you pay." He then banged the pen against the stall doors, one by one. Then, silence. The minutes dragged on. After maybe an hour,
There was nothing. I had no idea if he was still down there waiting for me. I had a pretty good spot on the wooden platform, but I couldn't move without making noise. Eventually, exhaustion overtook me, and I fell asleep right there. I woke up to voices coming from below. The employees were coming in for the morning leagues. I waited for another hour, listening until the place was busy, balls rolling, pins crashing, announcements over the speakers, etc. I carefully slid the tile aside again, making sure the coast was clear, before dropping down. I washed my face real quick to hide how wrecked I looked, and slipped out the side exit into the parking lot. No one batted an eye at me. I told my friends the full story, but no one believed me. They just thought I was trying to make my night in the bowling alley sound more exciting than it was. 2 of my friends were with me when I crawled up into the ceiling, and then hung around until closing time. So they believed that I did go through with the dare, but not the part about the maniac with the bowling pin. When I think back to that night, that man's disturbing murmuring still gives me the fucking creeps. You killed her. You killed my daughter. I don't know who he thought I was, but I'm okay with never finding out. I would hate to end this story like a corny urban legend, and I know it's been like 20 years, but a part of me still wonders if that man still visits that place when the lights go out, waiting in the back room with a bowling pin in his hand. I grew up in Antioch, California, and used to play football in high school. I had planned on making a career out of it, until I had a severe knee injury where my bone was forced out of the socket. Even after I rehabilitated, it was never the same, and it effectively ended my football aspirations. That's when I took up competitive bowling and eventually joined a league. We would often meet up at Delta Bowl and play 3 or 4 games. We would usually wrap things up around 10:30. On the night of December 7th, 2024, we had another league night and things went well. We did hear some loud arguing happening from one of the other lanes, but it had nothing to do with us. By 10:30, the place was emptying out fast. I grabbed my bag, zipped up my jacket, and pushed through the glass doors into the parking lot. My car was halfway down the row. As I was walking towards it, I heard voices rising sharp from the far end, near the perimeter fence. I saw someone in a hoodie standing next to a parked SUV. The man was yelling at someone in the car, sounding like he was threatening violence, and it looked like things were about to get ugly. I didn't stop to listen. It's none of my business. Then a loud pop came from that direction. My stomach dropped, along with the rest of me. More shots rang out. My heart was pounding so loud, it drowned everything else out. I stayed flat for another full minute. When all fell silent, I risked standing. My legs felt like jelly. I saw the hooded man from earlier, lying face down with a gun in his hand. The police showed up a short time later. The shooting was a result of an attempted robbery, which soon turned into a full-blown shootout. I'll paste an excerpt from a local news article about the incident. On the night of December 7th, 2024, a fatal gun battle occurred in the parking lot of the Delta Bowl in Antioch, California, resulting in the death of 2 men. Around 10:35 p.m., Antonio Drake, 34, was sitting in the driver's seat of his vehicle, preparing to leave the bowling alley, when DeAndre Reed, 35, approached Drake's vehicle. Investigators later determined Reed was attempting to rob Drake. An exchange of gunfire ensued between the 2 men. Both were fatally wounded in the encounter. There is no prior connection. Surveillance videos and evidence indicate that Drake and Reed did not know each other and had no conflict while inside the bowling alley. The Antioch Police Department classified the incident as an isolated attempted robbery because Drake was firing in response to being robbed. His shooting of DeAndre Reed is considered an act of self-defense, justifiable homicide. End of excerpt. It's interesting to me that several of the articles written about this case make this sound like it was a one-on-one isolated incident. The part about them having no conflict while inside the bowling alley is not true. News reports on television told a different version of events. The confrontation began inside the building, between two groups. Drake was a part of Group A, and Reed was a part of Group B. They were apparently bowling next to each other, when an argument broke out between the two groups. When it was time to leave, Reed then followed Drake to his car and tried to rob him. That's when the gunfire broke out. I was there that night, and I did hear the arguing coming from a few lanes down from us, and I personally saw Reed standing next to the SUV, shouting at who I assumed to be Drake, the driver. This is yet another case of senseless violence that has been escalating around here. The locals used to consider the bowling alley to be a safe haven from the violence that has plagued our streets. Not anymore. This happened back in 2003, when I was 19 and working as a busboy at Unity Lanes in Zephyrhills, Florida. It was one of those old-school bowling alleys, and is one of the only places Zephyrhills has to offer in the way of entertainment, which was the case back then as well. The night league was always packed with regulars. I got decent tips, and free pool games on the slower shifts. Nothing ever felt dangerous there, just families and drunks having fun. Friday nights would get a little crazy, but the worst that would happen is we had to throw out some white teenager dropping F-bombs and using the N-word. It was a Tuesday night. I was working the late shift. I would say this was around 9 p.m. The place was almost empty because it wasn't a league night. There were just a few lanes with customers. I was wiping down tables, stacking up chairs, when the manager told me to take 5. I grabbed my pack of Marlboros and slipped out the back door to the alley behind the building, where the dumpster sat against a concrete barrier. The back lot was always dark. There was only a dim light over the door. I lit up and leaned against the wall, taking a long drag. I was sort of zoning out when I heard something rustling inside the dumpster. It wasn't the wind. There was something shifting around in there. I froze. I figured it might be a raccoon or a cat, digging for scraps. But I shouted, "Hello?" Nothing. I shrugged it off and took another puff. Then, the lid of the dumpster flew open, and out she came, like a fucking jack-in-the-box. It was what you could loosely call a woman, maybe late 30s, wild hair matted with God knows what, eyes wide, and clothes filthy and torn. She had that emaciated look that crack addicts have, and she was screaming, a high-pitched wail that cut right through me. In her hand, she held a kitchen knife. She charged at me, full sprint, full banshee. The cigarette fell from my mouth. I didn't think, I just reacted, and shoved her hard with both hands, which sent her flying backward, and she fell hard on the asphalt, knife clattered away. I heard her cursing at me as I bolted back inside, slamming the door behind me and locking it. "Somebody call the cops, now! Some crazy lady just jumped out of the dumpster with a knife." Bystanders were looking at me like I was nuts, so I repeated myself. "I'm not joking. Some woman came out of the dumpster with a knife, and she just tried to fucking stab me." Cops arrived maybe 10 minutes later, lights flashing. They searched the back lot, but the dumpster was empty, and the woman was nowhere to be found. Lou, the manager, covered the rest of my shift after I was done giving my statement, and sent me home early. I was pretty shaken up about the whole thing. I found out that a couple of hours after the cops were called, they tracked her down a few blocks away, hiding in an abandoned shed in someone's backyard. She was a local repeat offender, drug addict, and had multiple arrests for animal abuse, starving dogs, and much worse. And get this, she attacked someone else a month earlier, slashed a guy in a gas station parking lot over him not giving her money. That one got her on probation, but after this, they revoked it and tacked on an assault with a deadly weapon charge. She ended up with a 5-year prison sentence. I never saw her again, and it was this incident that helped me quit smoking for good. Unity Lanes is still there to this day. It's been rebranded and completely remodeled from when I worked there. For the longest time, this was the only hangout spot for high school kids and 20-something-year-old alcoholics who lived in this town. I got really fed up with the environment of that place, and quit about a year after the dumpster woman incident. The owners apparently got fed up as well, because they started having a police car parked there on Friday nights, and security started kicking out anyone who wasn't there for bowling. I wish that policy was a thing back when I worked there. Anyway, that part of my life is long behind me, but I still get nervous when I'm around dumpsters.
Hey, thanks for taking the time to read my story. I've been sitting on my experience for some time now, and finally decided to share it. Just don't use my real name, okay? It was my niece's 8th birthday party at a place called Tampa Lanes, back when it was still open. It must have been one of the last big events there before everything shut down for good. We had a lane reserved right in the middle of the building, and I was there helping wrangle my niece and her friends, trying to get on their bowling shoes. That's when I first got this very uncomfortable feeling. There was this guy sitting alone at one of the lane tables besides us, wearing a dark jacket, face half hidden in shadow, just staring at me. I caught his gaze once and looked away fast, thinking maybe he was waiting for someone, but every time I glanced back, he was still fixed on me. No movement, no expression, just watching. I tried shaking it off, focusing on the party, giving high fives and cheering for gutter balls and eventually singing happy birthday, but the staring didn't stop. It got so bad that I switched spots and sat with my back to him, but I could still feel his eyes on me. After a while I turned back again. His gaze was still locked on me. Then he crossed the line. He was leaning forward, elbows on the table, then he stuck out his tongue. Slow, deliberate, sliding it across his lips. In this gross, sexual way, my stomach lurched. I didn't scream or make a scene, but my hand shook, and I marched straight to the front counter and told the manager, "There's a guy in a hoodie at the tables who has been staring at me nonstop, and he just did something really creepy and inappropriate with his tongue." The manager didn't hesitate. He grabbed his radio and called security. A couple minutes later, they walked the guy out of the building. He didn't resist, just shuffled towards the door with his head down, hoodie covering most of his face. The manager apologized, threw in some free tokens for the arcade as a sorry, and said they banned him from coming back. The party wound down around 5 o'clock. I carried the leftover gift bags to my sister's car and then headed over to my car. That's when I saw 2 police cruisers parked right next to my silver Honda. An officer had someone cuffed and bent over one of the cars. When I got closer, I saw that it was the hooded man, the same one who had been thrown out. Another cop walked up after I asked what was going on.
"Ma'am, is this your vehicle?"
I nodded, heart pounding. "Yeah? What happened?" He explained that a family leaving spotted him in the lot with a wire hanger, working it into the driver's side door of my car, trying to pop the lock. They shouted at him, but he ignored them, and just kept trying to unlock the car until they rolled up and arrested him a few minutes later. I stared at the fresh scratches around my door handle. The officer asked if I knew him. I said no, but quickly told him about what happened in the bowling alley earlier. They checked his background. He had priors for harassment, loitering, stuff like that. Nothing super violent, but enough to make my legs feel weak. They took my statement, let me go, and I drove home fast. To this day, I still don't know how he knew which car was mine. We pulled in hours earlier and unloaded cake and gifts with the kids and my sister, and nothing stood out to me, but he must have been there, watching from the lot. Maybe he saw me get out of my car when we first showed up and then followed us inside. I never went back to Tampa Lanes, and it wasn't long after that night it closed down for good, and the building has sat empty for years now. I have to drive by that place on my way to and from work, and every time I do, I wonder what could have happened to me if that man had managed to jimmy the lock on my car.
I grew up in a town where you didn't have to lock your bike or your back door. People waved at each other. You knew your neighbors, their dogs, even their routines. My whole elementary school experience was basically lived inside a single hallway. There were maybe 10 or 20 of us per grade, tops, and the same kids stuck around from 1st grade to 8th grade. We knew everything about one another, who got held back, whose parents were splitting up, who still wet the bed, even if nobody dared to say it aloud. We played baseball in the cul-de-sac, rode bikes behind the grocery store, took turns hosting birthday sleepovers with nothing but popcorn, surge, and a rented movie from that dirty old Planet Video. It was the 90s. Our lives revolved around Nintendo 64, Pogs, and who could do the best Jim Carrey impression. My parents trusted me, maybe too much. I was a latchkey kid by the 3rd grade, let myself in, microwaved a Hot Pocket, and watched whatever was on Fox Kids Block until they got home. I didn't get into much trouble. Most of us really didn't, there wasn't much to get into. Sleepovers, though, were how we marked time. Somebody's birthday meant Nerf wars, pizza, and fart jokes until somebody cried and puked. The houses were always safe, clean, and normal. Moms in fuzzy robes, dads who grilled hamburgers, old siblings who left us alone. That's just how it was. So when Mac Wallen invited the whole 6th grade crew over for his birthday sleepover, we all figured it'd be the same deal. A movie, maybe some late night junk food, somebody's hand in a bowl of warm water to see if they'd piss themselves. Because, well, that's just how they always go. Mac was new. He and his older brother Sam had moved into town that summer. Their house was in the dumpier part of the neighborhood where the roads weren't striped and half the lawns were just dirt patches. Sam was in 8th grade, but he didn't seem to like it. He was tall and greasy and had this mullet. All his shirts were missing sleeves and he had this twitch in his jaw like he was chewing something invisible. Even when he wasn't talking, he looked like he was about to spit. He didn't go out of his way to be mean, but nobody wanted to be near him. There was just something off about him. Mac, on the other hand, was different. Kind of funny, kind of crazy. A wild card. He'd say anything, try anything, and he didn't seem to care what people thought about him. That made him exciting in a way, especially to a bunch of bored 12-year-olds. He was like a free pass to mischief. Everybody wanted in on it. So when he handed out invitations, these cheap little printouts with monster trucks on them, we all said yes, of course. Every single last one of us. But of course, because you're listening to my story, we had no idea what we were walking into. We got off the bus late that Friday, backpacks slung over our shoulders, talking loud, acting tough. Mac was leading us onto the porch with that wide grin, crooked front teeth showing. His house, or maybe trailer, it was hard to tell, was sad low and sagging, like it had given up completely. There were 2 busted lawn chairs in the front and crushed beer cans sitting in the windowsill. One of the shutters hung by a single hinge. Sam stood there in the doorway, arms crossed, chewing on a toothpick. He didn't say anything, just watched us file inside, one by one. Inside, the place smelled like wet laundry and burnt grease. The living room carpet was a weird shade of gray that crunched when you stepped on it. Mac's mom came out from the kitchen, smiling at us. She had these sharp cheekbones and was wearing a skimpy pink tank top. No bra, nipples poking through, which made half the boys go red in the face. She handed out paper plates with cake already on them and said, "Y'all have fun tonight, okay?" Then disappeared back down the hall. A minute later, we heard a car door slam and then the rumble of an engine. Mac turned to us and said, "They're going to the bar. We got the whole house to ourselves." And for some reason, that didn't sit right with me. I'd never been left alone at a sleepover before, not without a parent at least within yelling distance. A few of the other boys hesitated too, looking at each other, but nobody said anything. No one wanted to be the baby that called their mom in the moment. And at first it was fine. Loud music, sugar, junk food. We played truth or dare, shot rubber bands at each other, tried to wrestle inside this cramped hallway. Sam hung around, not saying much, just grinning whenever somebody got hurt or fell too hard. Around 9, Max said he had something better than any kind of movie. He led us into the back room where he shared with Sam, pulled open a wooden chest by the bed. Inside that box were stacks of tapes, mostly unlabeled. Everyone immediately started hooting and nudging at each other. He slid a tape into the VCR and turned the little TV on. The screen filled with grainy footage. Somebody was filming in a bedroom, shaky cam style. And right away I knew it wasn't a movie. It was real. Mac's mom was on the bed, totally naked. Hair longer than, but definitely her. His dad, or somebody who looked like him, was standing behind her. And they weren't alone. A few of the boys laughed nervously, but the room had gone cold. No one was really breathing anymore. Sam stood behind us, arms crossed, and watched us watch the movie. "You like that, huh?" he said. "My dad used to tape everything." I wanted to leave right then, but I didn't know how to say it. Mac was grinning like it was just a joke. "That's just one of them. You want to see the rest?" He held up another tape in front of us. "No, dude, we're good," somebody muttered, but it was drowned out completely. Next came the toys, pulled out of a drawer in the nightstand inside their parents' room. Rubbery, oily things that smelled faintly of latex and sweat. One looked like a dog toy dipped in Vaseline. Mac tossed it to one of the boys who caught it and dropped it like it was on fire. And just when we thought we'd hit the bottom, Sam pulled out this small wooden box from underneath the bed. He clicked it open and inside was a revolver. Real, heavy, and shiny. The metal looked clean, like it'd been oiled recently. He held it up and said, "This is my dad's. Ain't it beautiful?" He pointed it at the ceiling first and then at one of the boys. "Bang," he said really quickly and loud. Everybody flinched. Mac laughed like we were a bunch of girls. "It's not loaded," he said, but his voice cracked when he said it. Sam walked around the room, slow pressing the barrel against foreheads, one after the other. I could feel my stomach folding in on itself. The boy next to me was shaking. When the gun got to me, I couldn't move, I couldn't breathe. Then I felt that cold metal kiss my skin. Sam grinned at me, clicked the hammer back, and then whispered, "What if?" And then he moved on. After that, the night completely had turned. The games stopped being games, and Sam kicked the family dog, a scruffy, sick-looking mutt named Jagger, right in the ribs for barking loud. Mac caught this mouse in a shoebox, then dumped it down the garbage disposal. Somebody said don't, but it was too late. The whir of the machine, the sound it made, it was blended alive. We all stood there just watching silently. Sam opened up the microwave and pulled out this small garden snake out of an old fish tank. Mac was laughing, but his eyes didn't match. They looked flat, almost like he wasn't really there. I turned away though. I didn't want to watch this one. The last straw came when they lit the neighbor's trash can on fire. We all crept outside trying to be quiet, but Sam was spraying lighter fluid and giggling to himself. The flame shot up fast, and he danced around it, bare feet on the pavement. I looked at the rest of the boys. One was crying, one looked like he was ready to throw up. The fun was gone, long gone. This wasn't even mischief anymore. This wasn't even rebellion. It was pure madness to me. I slipped back inside and grabbed my backpack, laced up my shoes with my shaking hands. My heart was pounding so loud I couldn't hear anything else. I opened up the front door, stepped off into the dark, and didn't look back. Not even once. The streetlights buzzed overhead. The night felt endless, and I just started walking. I didn't run, even though I wanted to. Every part of me screamed to just get away from there fast, but I didn't. I walked, one foot in front of the other, all the way down that cracked sidewalk, past parked cars and silent houses with normal lives behind the curtains. I think I even whispered the Lord's Prayer at some point, or maybe it was just some song that I'd heard on the radio. My brain didn't feel like it was working right. It felt like the world had shifted slightly now, like everything was tilted, off-center and shameful. My house was 8 blocks away, and each block felt like a mile itself. Every gust of wind made me flinch, and I kept thinking Sam was behind me the whole time, or Mac, or Even worse, somebody had followed me out of the TV screen, something from that grainy, grimy tape. Some man with a camera and a mask and a laugh like gravel. I made it home just after 11. My parents were in the living room watching the news. My mom was knitting and my dad was drinking tea. I opened up the door and stepped inside, and they looked up like I was just back from prison. My mom immediately said, "What's wrong?" I didn't answer. I dropped my backpack and just stood there. I must have looked like hell because she was off the couch and at my side in seconds. "Honey, what's wrong?" I started crying, not loud or blubbering, just quiet, whole body. My dad stood up confused, and I couldn't get the words out fast enough. I told him about the gun, about the tapes, about the dog, the snake, the fire. I told him everything except for the parts that I didn't fully understand. The way Sam looked at us, the way Mac laughed without even blinking or thinking twice. My mom held me so tight I could barely breathe. My dad turned the TV off and just said nothing for a really long time. The next morning, everything happened pretty quick. My parents called the school called the police, and a couple of the other boys' parents had already called in too. Apparently, one of the kids ran home in the middle of the night. Another one woke up screaming. It didn't take long for the Wallen place to be crawling with cops. I didn't go to school that day. None of us did, actually. Rumors flew around fast, and Sam got sent away, Mac got suspended. Their parents were under investigation for all kinds of things. The tapes were confiscated, so was the gun. Animal control took the dog, though I doubt he lived much longer after that night. The Wallens didn't stick around as well. A for sale sign went up the next week, and by the time Halloween had rolled around, the house was already boarded up. Nobody moved in after them either. Last I heard, it got condemned a few years later, torn down and then replaced by a strip of gravel and weeds. Nothing grows there now either. Makes me wonder if anything else happened there. My friends and I didn't really talk about it much after this, not really. Everybody who was there that night, me and the other boys, we stayed close for a while after. I guess trauma kind of does that to you. But by the end of the 8th grade, things had changed. A few moved away, a few fell in with rougher crowds, and one kid got picked up for theft his junior year. Saw in the paper. No one was the same after that night. As for me, I turned quiet, still went to school, obviously, still smiled in my pictures, but something in me curled up and died that night. I don't do sleepovers anymore. I don't go to parties. I don't trust anybody who talked way too much shit. I always check my doors. I always listen for the click of a lock. I became a bit of a hermit, and honestly, I kind of prefer it this way. I only ever went to one sleepover in my entire life. One. And that was plenty. It wasn't like my parents were super strict or even religious or anything. They just wanted to know the people that I was staying with, and after what happened that night, they made damn sure I never stayed the night at anybody's house again. It was 5th grade. The kid was Tommy Jurgens. Everybody liked Tommy. He was this little wiry dude with a loud mouth and this fake confidence that somehow worked for him. He knew every cheat code for every PlayStation game and could spit like 8 feet straight up in the air, then catch it back with his mouth. That kind of kid. Yeah, baby. We thought he was cool, but we didn't really know Tommy, not the way we thought we did. It turns out most of what made him cool was just him being raised by a pack of absolute lunatics. We'd see hints occasionally, like how he never brought lunch, just dollar bills and scratchers, or how he said these weird grown-up things. Stuff like, "My mom's old man just got out again," or "Uncle Mike's got court in Flagstaff." All that kind of skated over our heads back then, just Tommy being Tommy. He'd been in our class since 2nd grade, and even though he didn't have a ton of close friends, we all wanted to be around him. His life just seemed electric and different. So when he handed out birthday invites on a notebook paper, drawn in Sharpie and riddled with spelling mistakes, I still said yes without even asking my folks first. They weren't thrilled when I showed them, but Tommy's name rang a familiar enough bell that they gave in. I think my mom called his mom and talked for a full 90 seconds before saying it was okay. "All right, but if anything feels off," she said, "you can call us. I mean it." That Friday came. We were all rolled out the bus, hyped out of our minds. Tommy lived on the edge of town in this saggy house with 4 trucks parked out front and 2 boats in the yard. Neither seemed to be seaworthy though. Their garage was open, and I swear to God there was already a drum kit being set up. Real drums. A couple of guys carrying amps inside. We hadn't even taken off our backpacks yet either. Tommy met us on the porch with that usual grin and said, "You guys are gonna lose your freaking minds." And he wasn't lying. I remember walking in and thinking it was more like a party at my uncle's house than a birthday thing. There were adults already there, friends of Tommy's parents, I guess, all drinking and smoking and hanging out in the living room, laughing and didn't take notice of us at all. There were stacks of beer on top of the kitchen table, and the hallway smelled like somebody had burnt popcorn and covered it with weed smoke. Still, in the moment, I think we were just far too young to process what was wrong. At first, it just seemed like chaos. Loud music, cold sodas, big yard. We honestly figured that we stepped into the coolest birthday ever, but we had no idea. The backyard was the size of a football field, or at least it felt like it. There was a rusted trampoline with a bent leg that tilted to one side when more than 2 kids jumped on it, and somebody had duct taped an old dartboard to the trunk of a dying mesquite tree. The ground was patchy dirt and crabgrass, with empty beer cans littering the corners. A cooler full of orange sodas and RC Cola sat in the middle like a prize, and everybody tore into it. Then the band showed up, and I'm not kidding, an actual local band. 4 dudes in ripped jeans and dark sunglasses, lugging gear across the lawn onto a piece of plywood propped up on cinder blocks. One of them wore a vest with no shirt underneath, called themselves Code 3, and the lead singer yelled, "Let's wake this town up," inside a mic and screeched that made all the dogs in the neighborhood bark immediately. They kicked it off with "You Give Love a Bad Name," and every 5th grader in that backyard lost their minds. Even the shy kids were pogoing like it was a real concert. We were 11 years old, drinking sodas, hurling darts at a tree, and listening to a live Bon Jovi cover band, while a drunk guy that we'd never met grilled hot dogs on the porch. It was insane and also kind of amazing. As the sun dipped and the bug zapper came to life, the mood shifted though. The adults were getting sloppy. They weren't just a few beers deep anymore. There were bottles of liquor going now. I saw a guy pour something clear into a red Solo cup and then stumble into the garage. Inside, a few of the other guys, dudes in their 20s I guess, were playing darts for money, real cash laid out on a washing machine like a poker table. Tommy's dad, or the guy that we thought was his dad, was this thick, sweaty guy in cargo shorts with a big chain around his neck. He was barking at somebody named Shane about cheating. "You crossed the line, you dumb shit. I saw you," he said. Shane was this lanky, red-faced, holding a dart like he was about to throw it into somebody's eye. They had a second dartboard in the garage where the grown-ups were playing. We were all just standing there. I remember one of the kids, Tyler, saying, "Should we get out of here?" Before we could move though, Shane threw the dart at the board and missed it completely. It thunked into the wall, and that's when Tommy's dad shoved him, hard. Shane staggered, knocked over a milk crate of tools, and then came up swinging. The next 10 seconds were pure noise. Metal clattering, fist hitting meat, glass breaking. One guy got slammed into a water heater so hard it sounded like a gunshot. We just stood there, frozen. A few kids even started crying. The fight broke up after Tommy's mom, who'd been chain smoking on the back porch, came in and screamed at both of them to knock it off. She had this voice like salt and vinegar. I watched her dig her nails into Tommy's dad's arm and then drag him out by his very skin. "Party's back on," she slurred, and the band started another song like nothing had even happened. After that, the lines between what was fun and what was wrong began to blur really quickly. They busted out drugs not long after. Not weed in a discreet little joint either. We're talking actual drugs. A coffee table in the living room got cleared off, and Tommy's mom dumped out a sandwich bag full of greenish bud and what looked like a literal pile of white powder. It was almost like watching a movie. I thought it was flour at first, but it definitely wasn't. Some guy named Zeke started chopping it up with a Blockbuster card. I remember him saying, "Don't worry, this ain't coke, it just got some go fast," like it made it okay. Another adult, I think Tommy's aunt, was lighting up a glass pipe and singing along to Panama. Tommy came walking in the garage with this big stupid grin and a joint in his mouth, like it was candy. We all just stared at him and nobody said a word. "Dude, hit this," he said, offering it up to Cody Anderson. Cody shook his head and stepped back like it was a snake. Tommy just shrugged and took another puff. He coughed like a dying animal and laughed until he fell over. At that point, I was still having fun in this weird high-wire way. We'd snuck into an R-rated movie, and now we were holding our breath, hoping to not get caught. It was insane, yeah, but it didn't feel dangerous, at least not yet. We ended up in the backyard, sitting on lawn chairs, drinking warm soda, and watching Code 3 finish their last set. The adults were blitzed, falling over, laughing, forgetting their own kind of name drunk. Somebody was dry heaving in the bushes too. I was telling a ghost story to the other kids when we heard yelling again, same voices as before. Tommy's dad and, of course, Shane. "You shorted me," somebody screamed. "Nah, you just fucking suck at darts, Shane." Then another crash, a scream, and people running. We all stood up. A couple of kids took off toward the side yard. The rest of us crept around the garage, doing our best to be quiet. I could already feel the air shift, the way everything got really quiet really quickly. Shane was on the ground, blood on his shirt. Tommy's dad had a knife in one hand, still open. Not a kitchen knife either, one of those folding ones with a knuckle guard. Shane was moaning and gripping his side. Then somebody screamed. And then, bang, bang, bang. 3 shots, real ones, close and deafening. Screaming erupted everywhere. Tommy's mom was laying on the lawn crying. One of the band guys had tackled the dude with the gun and then got it away from him. No one got hit, thank God, but there were shell casings on the ground. The spell was now broken though. This wasn't a party anymore. It was a war zone. The cops showed up in under 10 minutes, sirens blaring, lights throwing red and blue across the lawn like a crime scene disco. I was still in the backyard, clutching my shoes and shaking so bad I could barely even untie the laces. Cody Anderson was crying and wouldn't stop saying over and over, "Did we just get shot at?" They herded us onto the sidewalk, told us to sit down and not to move. The neighbors were outside now, talking to the officers, pointing at the house like it was all normal. A woman wrapped up in a blanket asked me if I was okay. I just nodded back, but I wasn't, not even close. Parents started showing up, headlights rolling down the street one after another. My mom's face when she spotted me, I'll never forget it. She didn't even ask questions. She just wrapped me up in her arms and held me like I just came back from war. Tommy's dad got cuffed and loaded up into a cruiser. Shane got hauled off into an ambulance, conscious but bleeding through a wad of paper towels somebody had slapped on his ribs. A few other adults were questioned right there in the driveway. One guy took off before the cops could even get his name, just vanished off into the night with a backpack full of God knows what. We didn't end up going back to school on Monday, and neither did Tommy. Rumors, of course, flew around. The gun was stolen, the white powder was meth. One of the band members was an ex-con. I didn't care, I just wanted to forget it all, but honestly, I couldn't. None of us could. My mom told the school I wasn't allowed to sleep over at anybody's house again. "Not until you're out of my house and paying your own bills," she said to me, and that was that. I didn't argue. Last I heard, Tommy and his family had moved down the globe to somewhere near Yuma. He never came back. And just like I said at the beginning, I never stayed the night at another kid's house again. Truckers have rules. Some are written and some aren't. And one of these unwritten ones is that you never trust a shortcut at night. Roads that save you 30 minutes in daylight can cost you everything once the sun goes down. And I broke that rule. I was running late, behind schedule, and the GPS swore this country road was gonna shave half an hour off my route. I've been driving 14 hours straight. Eyelids were now heavy, coffee not doing much but souring my gut. I told myself 30 minutes was definitely worth it, as well as telling myself that the machine knew better than me. The turnoff was easy to miss, just this sagging sign for a farm-to-market road, half buried in the weeds. The asphalt was cracked, striping long gone. I slowed and swung my rig onto it, and watched the highway disappear in my mirrors. In those first few miles, it was absolutely fine. Empty, but fine. Fields of corn leaning in like they wanted to listen. half-lit farmhouses here and there, a rusted barn occasionally as well. Then the road began to narrow. Asphalt gave way to dirt. My headlights bounced over ruts, dust curling up in the beams. Trees were crowding closer, blotting out the sky. I gripped my wheel tighter, telling myself that I'd be back on the main highway soon enough. The GPS still showed that blue line ahead, urging me forward. And that's when I saw the first one, this old Buick, stripped down to its frame, sunk in the ditch with weeds growing through the windows. A mile later, a pickup with no doors, its cab peppered with bullet holes. Another mile or two and there was 2 SUVs now, gutted like fish, resting nose to nose in the trees. Okay, it's a vehicle dumping ground. Rural folks leave junk everywhere. But my throat was dry and my stomach was telling me that this wasn't just junk. These were leftovers. The dirt track dipped off into the hollow and that's when I saw the first glow, orange flickering like a campfire. As I came around the bend, the beams of my headlights caught them. 3 figures standing around a barrel fire in the middle of the road. Shadows were stretched long and sharp across the dirt. They didn't scatter like deer, they didn't wave at me like farmers or hunters. They just stood there, watching, hands at their sides, fire lighting up their faces. They didn't really look surprised to see me at all. I downshifted and slowed my rig, and one of them stepped forward. He had something long in his hand. It was metal and caught the firelight. A crowbar maybe, or maybe a rifle. It was hard to tell. My heart began slamming in my chest, and the GPS line still said continue straight, but I knew damn well this wasn't a road anymore. This was a trap. I kept the rig crawling, engine primed, headlights washing over the 3 of them like they were part of the road itself. None of them flinched, didn't move either, just stared at me. One with the metal rod, shifting in his weight, and then lifted it slightly, and I finally saw what it actually was. A length of pipe, capped on one end. Not a tool, but definitely a weapon. Every instinct screamed at me to swing wide, gun it, blast past them. But the road was far too narrow, the ditch was extremely deep, and the trees were pressing in tightly. If I tried to swerve, I'd jackknife the trailer and that would be the end of me. The guy in the middle raised his hand like a cop signaling to stop. My headlights painted his face. He wasn't old, maybe mid-20s. His eyes were flat and greasy, like he wasn't fully there. That kind of stare that tells you he's already decided what's about to happen. I braked slowly, praying this was just some kind of local screwing with me. My hand slipped on the wheel, my palms were sweating. It was almost so bad that it felt like oil. And that's when the others began to move as well, from the tree line. More shadows peeled off, 4, maybe 5 of them. They slipped into the ditches and then climbed the berms, boots crunching, all moving toward my rig now. Trap confirmed. I shifted back up, revving the engine hard. The guy with the pipe stepped closer, right into the glow of my brights. He pointed the pipe at my windshield like he was sighting me in. Then I saw him smirk. And that smirk absolutely broke me. I stomped the accelerator and the rig screamed, diesel roaring as I barreled forward. He didn't jump clear, he actually braced, like he was gonna stop 40 tons of steel with his own body. I didn't have time to consider his insanity. I watched him vanish underneath my grill, felt the sickening bump of impact rattle through the cab, and then I was past the fire. The barrel rolled, sparks spilling across the dirt, but it wasn't over yet. The figures scrambled on both sides. One leapt at the steps of the cab, hand slapping the metal, another smashing something against my trailer. The sound of breaking glass was exploding behind me. The rear marker lights had now shattered. I kept the pedal buried though. The dirt road twisted, my rig bouncing hard, but I still didn't lift my foot. The branches clawed at either side of the trailer, snapping like gunfire. The mirror showed chaos behind me, the fire now shrinking, shadows darting. Somebody running after me with arms pumping like pistons. Then headlights flared up behind me. And not just one set, 2, maybe 3. Engines gunned, tires sprayed dirt, and suddenly I was no longer the hunter, I was the prey. They were in vehicles that I'd not seen parked, hidden somewhere deeper in the trees waiting. The GPS blue line was useless now, frozen, spinning, and recalculating. I didn't need it to tell me what I already knew. I had miles of dirt track ahead of me, and a pack behind me. The Crown Vic from earlier, a battered pickup, and something else low-slung with a screaming engine. They came in fast and reckless, almost like they'd done this chase 100 times before. My trailer fishtailed and mud sprayed. I fought the wheel, felt the back tires bite again. My whole world shrank into a tunnel of my headlights and vibrating wheel in my hands. And then the first shot rang out. Glass exploded on the passenger side, a spider web cracking across the lower pane. My ears rang, and somebody had fired from the pickup, very close now, headlights blinding in my mirror. I ducked low, keeping one hand on the wheel, and jerked the rig left, then right. The trailer rocked, tires screamed. One of them overcommitted. I think the Crown Vic clipped the ditch and flipped, sparks and steel tumbling in my rear view. But the others continued coming. Another shot, closer. A hole punched through the passenger mirror now, the glass raining down in shards. I swore loudly, shifted down, then redlined the engine. The road then suddenly opened up into this wide stretch, fields on either side, no trees. Moonlight turned the dirt silver. Then I spotted a sign half buried in the weeds. County road ends, bridge out. My stomach dropped. I couldn't stop, not with them behind me. The bridge was nothing more than this rotted span across a shallow creek. I saw it in the last second. Half the planks were gone, support beams sagging. But it was too late. I hit it doing 50. My trailer shuddered, wood splintered like bone. And for a second I was airborne, stomach in my throat. And then the front tires slammed the dirt on the other side. Metal screamed, sparks lit up, but somehow, by some miracle, the trailer didn't shear off. Behind me, that pickup wasn't so lucky. It hit the gap far too slow and the front end cleared, but the back axle snapped, dragging it down nose first into that creek bed. One engine still screamed. The low-slung car had made it across, fishtailing wildly, still chasing. The headlights swerved, drawing closer and closer until it pulled up alongside me. I saw the driver now, close enough to smell oil and cigarettes through that busted-out window. His face was painted with something, black streaks under his eyes like war paint. He was screaming something that I couldn't hear, and it sounded like some kind of cry. Then he jerked his wheel toward me. Metal slammed metal, my cab rattled, and I fought the wheel and pushed back. The two of us locked in this deadly dance at 50 miles an hour. He tried again, slamming into me, only this time I was ready. I jerked left, forcing him into the ditch. His headlights veered, his car tipped, then he was gone, rolling and flipping, steel shrieking as it tore itself apart. Silence only followed me now, only my engine was the only thing making noise. I kept the pedal down, heart still jackhammering, hands shaking so bad I could still even grip the wheel. Then the GPS chimed in, calm as anything. Rejoining highway in 2 miles. I almost laughed. Almost. 2 miles never felt so far in my life, and that dirt track bucked under my tires, each rut threatening to snap an axle. Every single shadow out in those fields twitching like it wanted to step out onto the road. My ears were ringing from the gunshots, and my hands were now welded to that wheel. I continued checking the mirrors, waiting to see more headlights reappear, waiting for another engine to scream up behind me, but there was nothing, just black fields and broken fences under the moonlight. The GPS purred like it hadn't just tried to feed me to the wolves. In 1 mile, turn left. When I saw the highway again glowing faint under the moonlight, I could have cried. Pavement, civilization, lifeline. I hit the turn so fast my tires were squealing, trailer tipping dangerously before it slammed back down. I shot back onto the interstate like I'd been launched from a cannon. 60, 70, 80. I didn't care, I'm not stopping. But adrenaline really will only last for so long. After 10 minutes of white-knuckle driving, I eased back, checked my gauges, and listened for anything wrong with my rig. The grill was bent, one mirror was gone, and the marker lights were busted, but she was still running, still alive. Unlike them. I pulled into a truck stop 45 minutes later. Lights bright, pumps humming, people inside, real people. I parked crooked and staggered out of my cab, then went straight to the bathroom to splash some cold water on my face. The reflection that looked back at me was pale, eyes wide, pupils like pinholes. My shirt was completely soaked in sweat. I didn't call the cops, didn't even tell another driver. what would I really say? That a gang in the middle of the woods tried to hunt me down on a dirt road that my GPS told me to take? That I ran a man down with 40 tons of steel just to make it out alive? I really doubt that anybody would believe me. And even if they did, out here in the middle of nowhere, it wouldn't really matter. I got back in my rig, hands still gently shaking, and I made a promise to myself. Never again. Never trust the blue line. Never take a road that you don't know. But occasionally late at night when the interstate goes empty and the CB chatter dies out, I still will think about that shortcut, about those stripped cars rusting in ditches, the barrel fire lighting up the trees, and that smirk on that kid's face before I hit him. Gravel crunches under the tires as I ease down that last stretch of a dirt road. The air thins out up here. Pine trees crowd the hillsides. Dark water spreads wide and flat up ahead. The reservoir, nobody else around. That's good. I kill the engine and my daughter kicks her door open before I've even unbuckled my seatbelt. She's got the tackle box in one hand, the rod in the other, already marching up to the shoreline, 15 years old and impatient as hell. I grab the cooler and the net and then follow her down the slope. The water is cold. A breeze ripples across it, carrying the creak of the pines. I scan the bank, the sand, the rocks, and the brush. Quiet. Too quiet maybe, but I guess that's really what we came for. Just us, no crowds, no phones, no other buzzing. I glance over and see a tent, half collapsed, staked right at the edge of the water, maybe about 15 yards down. No car, no boots outside, just nylon sacking, door flap open, shadows inside it. Somebody else beat us to it, my daughter says. She sounds annoyed. I tell her not to worry, place is big enough for two. But I feel my stomach shift. Tent looks all wrong, like it's been there for quite some time. We end up settling a little ways off, and she sets up quick, hooks her bait, and casts out into the water. The bobber plunks and drifts off. I unpack the cooler, crack open a soda, and just try to shake off the unease in the air. Then I take note of the tackle box that's near that tent. It's not ours, just sitting in the dirt, lid open, lures spilling out like teeth. Hey, I call out to my daughter, nodding toward it. You see that? She follows my gaze and then frowns. Yeah, weird. We continue fishing anyway. Time drags on, but no bites. And throughout that time, I keep glancing over at the tent, waiting for somebody to crawl out, to stretch, to wave, to do something, but nothing happens. The flap just flutters in the wind and the whole thing sags a little lower. The sun slowly slides down the back of the ridge. The air cools fast. I row us out in that inflatable dinghy. My daughter balanced in the front, line trailing in the water. Dad? She says. Her voice makes me turn quickly. She's pointing down. Beneath us, maybe 10 feet below, the headlights glowing dull in green. A car, submerged doors open, weeds waving out like hair. The reflection ripples across the surface, lighting up her now pale face. I grip the oars, throat's now dry. My first thought, an accident. Somebody drove off the road. My second thought, it's been down there for a while. Where the hell is the report? Where the hell are the people? The breeze then dies and the water flattens. And that's when he steps out of the tree line. Barefoot, clothes dripping wet, sticking to his skin, moving slowly and steadily down toward that tent. He sees us. Then he starts walking straight into the reservoir. I dig the oars deep, water slapping against the dinghy, plastic flexing underneath us. My daughter twists around, eyes wide, as she watches him. He continues though, he doesn't stop. The man wades out, knees, thighs, waist, water black around him. He doesn't really swim, he doesn't break stride, he just kind of keeps walking, shoulders rolling slow. Dad, go! I yank harder, the oars bite, the dinghy skates across the surface, but I still hear him, water churning behind us. He's not fast at all, but he is steady. His face is pale, his lips pulled in tight, teeth clenched, eyes wide and fixed on us. He keeps staring at us like we're already caught. The boat drags and something snags underneath us. I look down. Weed or rope, I can't tell. I yank an oar free and jab at it. My daughter screams. He's gotten closer now, waist deep, shoulders breaking the water. He still hasn't slowed down. He actually snags my daughter's fishing line and starts yanking on her rod. "Cut the line," I shout to her. Her rod's still out, line stretching taut. She fumbles, hands shaking, knife scraping out of the tackle box. She saws at it, plastic wheel whining. Snap, and the line breaks. I slam both oars, dig deep, and the boat lurches free, shoots forward. I don't stop. My arms burn, and my chest feels like it's about to split open. Then I glance back, and he's gone. The water ripples. Empty. I spin the dinghy, searching. The tent on shore sagging in black, pines hissing with the wind, but there's nothing on the bank. "Where is he?" my daughter whispers. And then the dinghy jolts, a hard knock from below it. We both scream, and I almost lose the oars. Another thud, harder this time, shaking the boat. Water splashes over the side. He's under us. "Move!" she cries to me. I row blind, wild. The boat jerks forward, then stalls again, and something scrapes the bottom. Nails on plastic. The dinghy rocks hard, and she clutches onto the side. A hand then bursts up through the water, pale and slick, fingers crawling at the rim of the boat. Nails were blue, skin wrinkled like it'd been soaking in it for weeks. I swing, and the oar smashes down, the crack of wood on bone, and the hand slips under and vanishes quickly. The boat spins, my daughter's sobbing. I row harder, every stroke sloppy and desperate. The shoreline draws closer and closer, 10 feet, then 5, and I hit gravel. She leaps out, scrambling up on the bank. I drag the dinghy halfway out, chest heaving, heart pounding in my skull. The water settles and silence follows. The tent hangs limp beside us, flap open like a mouth. "Get to the truck," I pant. I shove her ahead and glance back over my shoulder. The reservoir is glass, no ripples and no sign of that man. We sprint uphill, and my boots slip on the shale, my lungs tearing open. The truck glows in the sunlight, our salvation. I fumble with the keys in my pocket. My daughter's already clawing at the handle, and she yanks open the door, hauls herself inside. I jam the key twist, and engine coughs and sputters, and won't catch. "Come on, come on." And then I hear it, another sound, behind us, the slap of bare feet onto gravel, slow and steady, getting closer and closer. When I look up in the mirror, he's there, walking up the center of the dirt road, soaked clothes hanging, hair plastered to his skull. His smile still hasn't changed. His hands hang limp, swinging easy. The truck engine coughs again and dies. My daughter's full out crying now, rocking in her seat. I slam the key again and pump the pedal, praying. The man keeps walking, 10 yards, 9, 8, and finally, the engine roars to life. I slam it into reverse, tires spitting out gravel. My headlights wash over him. He doesn't flinch, doesn't raise a hand, just walks straight into the beam. I floor it. The truck shoots backward, gravel spraying and then spins, fishtailing onto the track. My daughter rips out another scream and clutches the dash. I stomp the gas, and the reservoir vanishes. Pines whip by, black and endless. I don't look in the mirror, not even once. But I swear, even over the engine's roar, I can still hear those footsteps on gravel keeping pace. I don't lift my foot, and the truck screams up that dirt road, bouncing hard enough to rattle our teeth. Branches lash at the windows. Gravel spits under the tires. My daughter curled up against the seat, fists in her hair, sobbing uncontrollably. The road then curves, straightens, and dips, and I keep it pinned, 80 on a track built for 20. The wheel jerks and tries to tear from my grip, but I hang on. Slowly, the reservoir falls away behind us, black water, blacker trees, and I tell myself, it's gone, it's done. But my skin says differently. My skin says, He's still there. I risk one look into the rear view, but there's nothing, just dust hanging in the air. I want to believe it, but the steering wheel shakes under my hands and I realize it's not the road, it's me. I'm the one shaking that hard. When we finally hit pavement, it was a miracle. The truck surges onto the country road, tires screaming, and then grips solid. My chest caves with relief, and my daughter finally looks up, tears streaking across her face, lips trembling. "Is he gone?" she whispers to me. I want to tell her yes, God, I want to, but the word dies off in my throat. Headlights bloom up ahead, oncoming, a sedan silver creeping slowly. It flashes its brights once, then twice. I ease the truck right, hands slippery on the wheel. The sedan doesn't pass, it slows and it pulls in behind us. My daughter sees it too, her nails digging into my arm. The car stays back just far enough that the headlights blur, and just close enough that we can't forget it's there. As I press harder on the gas, the sedan matches me, and we ride like that for miles and miles, me pushing 80, it shadowing us, no closer, no further, just locked in. Then, just as suddenly as it appeared, it turns off, no signal, no brake lights, just gone off into a dirt cut, swallowed up quickly by the trees around it. Silence fills the cab, and my daughter slumps against the door, completely spent. I grip the wheel until my knuckles ache, and I'm just afraid if I let go, everything will unravel. We don't stop, not until we hit town and file up a police report. The car is found in the water, no bodies, and no suspects.
This story is from my hike from Graz, Austria to Venice, Italy. It might not be as frightening as some other stories, but I want to share it. In the summer of 2023, my two friends and I, all 17 years old at the time, were in the final week of our hike from Graz to Venice. It was late at night, and we still hadn't found a place to set up our tents. We were walking along a seemingly endless beach, exhaustion weighing heavily on us after 20 days of walking. Our legs ached from blisters, and we had already taken minutes-long pauses to regain energy. We were all eager to rest. Eventually, we found a suitable spot on the map, a beach further away from the city we were in, and decided to head there. By this time, we had briefly entered the city but hadn't gone deep into it. The streets were empty except for some tourists near the beach. I was so exhausted that I was even walking with my eyes closed. To reach our campsite, we had to take a small gravel path connected to one of the streets. As we arrived at the intersection that led to our intended campsite, a man suddenly emerged from the path we needed to take, which led right into the woods, and walked right past us. My friend, distracted by fatigue, walked past the intersection without noticing it. I quickly called out to him, pointing out that we needed to take that path. Just after I corrected my friend, I don't know why, but I glanced back and noticed the man standing in the middle of the road, motionless, staring at us. For a few seconds I looked at him, but it was pitch black, so I couldn't make out his features. I didn't think much of it and decided to continue walking. However, as soon as we entered the gravel path, we made a chilling discovery. The man was now following us, heading back from where he had just come. As we began to worry, all our exhaustion and pain vanished, along with the weight of our fully packed backpacks. While still walking down this dark path, we started discussing what to do rather loudly, not expecting him to understand our language since we weren't locals. After a brief discussion, we decided that jumping into the field next to the path was a better option than staying on the path or facing the man. So, after about 30 meters of walking along the path, we jumped into the field. The field was full of crops and difficult to wade through, including jumping over some kind of ditch in the middle of the field. But with adrenaline pumping, we barely noticed the discomfort and kept running as fast as we could with these huge backpacks. As soon as the man saw us move, He immediately turned back and returned to the road that we had just left. We quickly did the same, and with a head start, we managed to put some distance between us and him. Our shorts and shoes were wet. However, there was no time to care. The man was still following us. We rushed through the streets of the city, and as soon as we didn't see him anymore, we calmed down a bit. Still, fear kept us moving, trying to stay in the darkness so he couldn't see us. Walking past the gas station at the end of the city, which could be seen from the street where we had met the man, we continued and walked another 5 kilometers before finally setting up our tents, far away from where we had encountered the man. To this day, we have no idea if he was just a drunkard playing a twisted joke, or if he had more sinister intentions. And who knows what might have happened if it hadn't been for those pauses that we took. We might have been right on time to meet this mysterious man further down into the darkness of the woods. I can't breathe. My eyes are open, and I am able to see everything around me. Yes, it's shrouded in darkness, but it's still my room, and I am still in my bed. Except I can't move, and I can't breathe. I can feel the eyes of something sinister on me. Something is watching me from the darkness that is surrounding me. I don't see it. I can smell it. A putrid, stagnant smell, like sulfur, acid, and bowel movement all in one. But I feel it. I feel anger and the hatred in the air around me. The room I fell asleep in was peaceful. It's my room. I can see the Jack Skellington tapestry on the wall across from me. The television is in sleep mode, the little bubbles dancing around the screen. I can feel the weight of my tiny dog beside me under the blanket. My drawings hung where they were when I fell asleep, but the darkness in the room is darker. The feeling in the room is evil. There's a sound. What's that sound? It's not me. I can't breathe, I can't move, and I for sure can't speak. But something is moving. Footsteps. Those are footsteps that I can hear, coming from my closet. I cut my eyes, looking as far to the side of them to try and see who or what. But there's nothing there. Until there's movement at the end of my bed. Looking down, still unable to do anything but stare. There he is, the guy in the top hat. He's tall, all black. He's not a he at all, but a thing. No facial features are eminent, but I can make out a grin spreading across his blank and stoic face. He's enjoying this. The torture and pure terror I feel. I can tell he's feeding off of it. Tightly shutting my eyes, I'm hoping that doing this will make him go away. My eyes fly back open in a panic when I feel breath on my face and neck. There he is, hovering over me, the grin wider than it was before. I tried to make him disappear. He's mouthing something, but no words are audible. And then in a growling whisper, "I watch you sleep at night. So lovely you are. From this night forward until time ends, I will watch you sleep. Time and time again." Praying in my head that he will just go away, I can feel the tears gliding down the sides of my face. I still can't breathe, move, or speak. I'm so beyond trapped, and the terror welling inside me needs to be released. I open my mouth, forming a scream, and in my mind, that's all I'm doing, screaming as loud as possible. Finally, the only thing filling the silence and the darkness that surrounds me are my screams. I sit up as quickly as possible and gather myself. Inhale. 1, 2, 3. Exhale. 1, 2, 3. After I had pulled myself together and obtained the courage to go to the bathroom, I head that way. Upon returning to my bed, I grab my phone to check the time, and there, present on the screen, is a picture taken of me from above. My eyes wide and filled with tears that are streaming down my cheeks, mouth open in the form of a scream, and a dark glaze over my eyes. Those don't look like my eyes. I work at a restaurant in a small town, and I have been locking up at the end of the night for a year now. It's nice, easy money, and I usually get paid an extra hour while doing simple tasks like cleaning or rolling silverware. It's actually calming after a hectic night in the kitchen. I never check bathrooms or anything before locking up. Usually the restaurant is empty well before I am finished, and I have a lot of time to myself. There is something so eerie about being in a restaurant alone after closing. What was once a bustling place full of people is now empty and silent. The sounds of the machinery kicking on can be heard across the restaurant. The sound of the ice machine dumping ice usually makes me jump. With the layout of the restaurant, the main light switches are on the opposite side of the restaurant from the door with the alarm. So I usually lock the back and front doors and then turn off all the lights. Then I make my way through the dark restaurant to the side door, which has the keypad. In order to arm the system, all doors need to be closed and there needs to be no movement in the restaurant. If there is an error, it will tell me the door that is open, or infrared, and the area where there is movement. When I first started locking up, I needed the flashlight on my phone to navigate to the door. But now I know the layout, so I just walk in the darkness. For some reason, it is less scary to just speed walk through the dark than to have a dimly lit phone light casting shadows and reflecting off surfaces. I hate to say it as a grown man. The dark creeps me out. Tonight, the restaurant had been closed for almost 2 hours. I mopped the kitchen, cleaned a bit, and rolled some silverware for the morning crew. I locked the doors, turned off the lights, then made my way through the dark restaurant to the door. I typed in the code and got an error. Error, infrared detected. Dining room. I felt my stomach sink. I know I've been alone in this restaurant for 2 hours. I know I had just walked through that pitch-black dining room. Just then I heard footsteps pounding on the tile coming towards me from the dining room. I have gotten chills down my spine before when something creeps me out. But this was different. It felt like my entire nervous system was overloaded. I didn't even turn around, I just opened the door and bolted out into the parking lot. I didn't hear any footsteps behind me. I got in my car and peeled out. I drove down the street and called 911. And then my boss. I waited until they arrived before I went back into the restaurant. The door was wide open. There was no sign of anyone. Nothing was stolen, nothing was broken. I gave a report of what happened, and that was it. The only interior camera that is pointed at the cash registers didn't see into a majority of the dining room, but the exterior camera caught something that scared the life out of me, and that I will think about for the rest of my life. It captures me running out of the building and around the corner to my car. Shortly after I exited, you could barely see the elongated shadow of someone standing by the door beneath the camera, watching me run away. The person casting it being just out of frame, before turning the opposite direction and disappearing. Just seeing my terrified self running away and that shadow watching me do so. I have never felt so vulnerable. I'm not really a believer in the paranormal, but I just don't know what kind of sick person would wait in a restaurant for 2 hours after close. Not steal anything, just to scare the employee that was locking up. I know for a fact it wasn't any of my coworkers. Obviously, there wasn't much that could be done to find out who it was. Nothing shows anyone entering the building after close, and from what we could tell, everyone who entered that day had left. This event still has me questioning myself on whether it was a sick prank, someone mentally ill, or something supernatural. In my late teens, early 20s, I was a venture scout and leader for trips my local Boy Scout troop went on. I'm a female, but my brother was part of the troop for years, and I became friends with everyone in the troop. I completed my youth protection training and was allowed to become a leader/chaperone on camping trips and other wilderness-related outings. I had a longtime friend in the troop. Let's call him Sam, and he was a close friend of my whole family. Sam was a little older than me and had already been a Boy Scout leader for several years at this point. This story takes place in November of 2018. Sam and I were made the leaders of an upcoming camping trip, the annual fall canoe float down the Buffalo National River in Arkansas. The Buffalo River runs about 135 miles through the Ozark Mountains, with enormous bluffs on at least one side or the other through most of it. It flows through some of the most beautiful parts of northwest and northern Arkansas, and despite my incident, I still encourage you to take a trip there. We had made camp that afternoon on a riverbank after about 15 miles from where we put it in. The scouts put up their tents about 25 yards upstream of my tent, with the campfire and cooking station situated in between us. As I was setting up, I mentioned to Sam that I was a little nervous about sleeping in my tent alone for the first time. He shrugged me off and told me it would be fine, that sleeping alone was actually quite peaceful. I remember rolling my eyes because, unlike me, Sam had not only been camping completely alone for years, he had also done it in a hammock, with no other what I consider protective gear. I didn't bother to ask him to tent with me because according to the scouting rules, males and females cannot share tents, and I didn't want to get in trouble the very first time I was leading the troop. However, I think Sam sensed my unease, and he set up his sleeping arrangements outside my tent, which consisted of a sleeping pad on the ground with his canoe flipped over on top of him, like a coffin. To this day, I admire what it must have been like to live with so little concern. We all spent the evening around the campfire, talking and making dinner. The forest and the river all around us was so full of life that I felt a little more comfortable when we all decided to turn in for the night. I watched Sam lay down on his pad and flip the canoe over on top of him, before sighing with contentment, and I climbed into my tent. I spent the first hour or two reading, while listening to the sounds of the boys up the riverbank fade, as they all started to fall asleep. But I couldn't. The nighttime temperature had dropped below freezing. Then, of course, I needed to pee. I spent probably another 10 minutes trying to trick myself into forgetting about it and fall asleep, but it was impossible. Finally, I got out of my tent, tapped Sam's canoe to let him know where I was going, and then headed up the bank for some privacy. I don't know how many women on here have peed in the woods, but if you have, you'll know it's one of the worst things about camping. What made it even worse is because I was cautious about being seen. I climbed all the way up the embankment and walked about 10 feet into the woods before stopping. And oh my gosh, it was miserable. Not only having to drop drawer in the freezing cold, but also being completely vulnerable. But the worst part about it was the woods were completely silent. Not a cricket, not a rustle of a squirrel. Nothing. It didn't click in my head until years later about how bad that actually is. Just the primitive part of my brain started screaming to leave immediately. I ran back to the embankment before sliding down onto my butt and sprinting back to camp. Once back around everyone else, and in the glow of the full moon, I had a little more sense of security. The river was burbling on quietly, and I could see the dying embers of the campfire before getting the idea to take the warm rocks from the campfire and put them in my sleeping bag to try to get enough warmth to sleep. I drug about 4 or 5 decent-sized stones into my tent and slipped them into the bottom of my sleeping bag. Unfortunately, it just wasn't enough. I was awake for hours in pain from how cold I was, trying to rub the ache out of my legs. I remember actually tearing up a bit with how exhausted and cold I was. That's when I heard a noise, like footsteps walking around downstream from my tent. The bank was covered in smooth river stones, so any kind of footsteps would make noise. But the sound of the rocks shifting told me that this was something large. Then I heard them enter the water, and I worried one of the boys was awake and going for a midnight swim. I quickly unzipped my tent and poked my head out to see an elk drinking from the river. At least it looked like an elk. It was massive, but it was far enough away and standing perfectly in shadow that I wasn't quite sure. It was much too big to be a deer, but we don't have moose in Arkansas. I quietly watched it, hoping to see more of it, when it looked directly at me. Its face, even in the shadow, triggered my primitive brain again. If my blood wasn't running cold before, it was now. I felt this prickling up my neck as this unknown terror crept into my bones. I ducked my head back into my tent and stayed completely still for hours. The combination of fear and the cold wasted any hope of sleeping. I never heard the elk thing leave the bank, but I also didn't even think about listening for it. The woods were that almost screaming silence again. After what felt like hours, someone tapped on my tent and said, "Come on out, it's time to go." I pressed my face into my hands and breathed a sigh of both relief and exhaustion. I had made it through the night, and even though I didn't get any sleep, it was over. I quickly stuck my feet in my boots and stepped out of my tent to find nothing. It was still night. I had confused the light from the moon as dawn. No one was around my tent, and the time it took from when they spoke to me to when I came out was not enough time for one of the boys to make it back to their tent before I saw them. That pricking feeling came back, but this time it was all over my body as I heard a voice in my head say, "Don't turn around." I slowly sat backwards in my tent and zipped myself up into it with shaking hands. I laid down in my sleeping bag and covered my face and prayed. I prayed for so long until I finally fell asleep. In the morning, I woke up to the familiar voice of Sam talking to another scout outside my tent. I could feel the warmth of the sun beating down into my tent. I know I looked terrible by the way Sam did a double take upon seeing me. "Oh, geez, you look like you didn't sleep at all." "Did you come to my tent last night?" I asked him. Sam, still studying my face, slowly responded, "No." "Please don't play with me. If you did, you got me good. Great. Just don't continue the joke right now if you did, please." I felt a little bad being accusatory, because Sam was actually a pretty no-nonsense guy, especially when it came to being in charge on camping trips. "Diana, no. I wouldn't try to scare you. I know how nervous you were about sleeping alone out here." He folded up his pad before tossing it into his canoe and throwing it over his shoulder. "But I guess you were too scared last night." I looked confused. "What?" Sam gestured up the embankment into the woods. "I heard you make a few trips up there. Next time, just get a Gatorade bottle and you won't have to leave your tent. Around that time, the rest of the scouts had announced that they had finished cooking breakfast, and everyone migrated to the campfire. But I felt like I had just sunk down to my knees in the river mud. I had left the tent once. I went up the embankment and came back down once. So if it wasn't me, what had Sam heard coming out of the woods and checking out my tent multiple times that night? Why hadn't I heard it? I have told this story to people before, and they say I had just dreamed it, but I know that I hadn't. I had been too cold and had sat up in my sleeping bag most of the night, rubbing my legs. And since I know it wasn't a dream, what is hiding and hunting in the woods along the Buffalo River? In my late teens, early 20s, I was a venture scout and leader for trips my local Boy Scout troop went on. I'm a female, but my brother was part of the troop for years, and I became friends with everyone in the troop. I completed my youth protection training and was allowed to become a leader/chaperone on camping trips and other wilderness-related outings. I had a longtime friend in the troop. Let's call him Sam, and he was a close friend of my whole family. Sam was a little older than me and had already been a Boy Scout leader for several years at this point. This story takes place in November of 2018. Sam and I were made the leaders of an upcoming camping trip, the annual fall canoe float down the Buffalo National River in Arkansas. The Buffalo River runs about 135 miles through the Ozark Mountains, with enormous bluffs on at least one side or the other through most of it. It flows through some of the most beautiful parts of northwest and northern Arkansas, and despite my incident, I still encourage you to take a trip there. We had made camp that afternoon on a riverbank after about 15 miles from where we put it in. The scouts put up their tents about 25 yards upstream of my tent, with the campfire and cooking station situated in between us. As I was setting up, I mentioned to Sam that I was a little nervous about sleeping in my tent alone for the first time. He shrugged me off and told me it would be fine, that sleeping alone was actually quite peaceful. I remember rolling my eyes because, unlike me, Sam had not only been camping completely alone for years, he had also done it in a hammock, with no other what I consider protective gear. I didn't bother to ask him to tent with me because, according to the scouting rules, males and females cannot share tents, and I didn't want to get in trouble the very first time I was leading the troop. However, I think Sam sensed my unease, and he set up his sleeping arrangements outside my tent, which consisted of a sleeping pad on the ground with his canoe flipped over on top of him, like a coffin. To this day, I admire what it must have been like to live with so little concern. We all spent the evening around the campfire, talking and making dinner. The forest and the river all around us was so full of life that I felt a little more comfortable when we all decided to turn in for the night. I watched Sam lay down on his pad and flip the canoe over on top of him, before sighing with contentment, and I climbed into my tent. I spent the first hour or two reading, while listening to the sounds of the boys up the riverbank fade as they all started to fall asleep. But I couldn't. The nighttime temperature had dropped below freezing. Then, of course, I needed to pee. I spent probably another 10 minutes trying to trick myself into forgetting about it and fall asleep, but it was impossible. Finally, I got out of my tent, tapped Sam's canoe to let him know where I was going, and then headed up the bank for some privacy. I don't know how many women on here have peed in the woods, but if you have, you'll know it's one of the worst things about camping. What made it even worse is because I was cautious about being seen. I climbed all the way up the embankment and walked about 10 feet into the woods before stopping. And oh my gosh, it was miserable. Not only having to drop drawer in the freezing cold, but also being completely vulnerable. But the worst part about it was the woods were completely silent. Not a cricket, not a rustle of a squirrel. Nothing. It didn't click in my head until years later about how bad that actually is. Just the primitive part of my brain started screaming to leave immediately. I ran back to the embankment before sliding down onto my butt and sprinting back to camp. Once back around everyone else, and in the glow of the full moon, I had a little more sense of security. The river was burbling on quietly, and I could see the dying embers of the campfire before getting the idea to take the warm rocks from the campfire and put them in my sleeping bag to try to get enough warmth to sleep. I drug about 4 or 5 decent-sized stones into my tent and slipped them into the bottom of my sleeping bag. Unfortunately, it just wasn't enough. I was awake for hours in pain from how cold I was, trying to rub the ache out of my legs. I remember actually tearing up a bit with how exhausted and cold I was. That's when I heard a noise, like footsteps walking around downstream from my tent. The bank was covered in smooth river stones, so any kind of footsteps would make noise. But the sound of the rocks shifting told me that this was something large. Then I heard them enter the water, and I worried one of the boys was awake and going for a midnight swim. I quickly unzipped my tent and poked my head out to see an elk drinking from the river. At least it looked like an elk. It was massive, but it was far enough away and standing perfectly in shadow that I wasn't quite sure. It was much too big to be a deer, but we don't have moose in Arkansas. I quietly watched it, hoping to see more of it, when it looked directly at me. Its face, even in the shadow, triggered my primitive brain again. If my blood wasn't running cold before, it was now. I felt this prickling up my neck as this unknown terror crept into my bones. I ducked my head back into my tent and stayed completely still for hours. The combination of fear and the cold wasted any hope of sleeping. I never heard the elk thing leave the bank, but I also didn't even think about listening for it. The woods were that almost screaming silence again. After what felt like hours, someone tapped on my tent and said, "Come on out, it's time to go." I pressed my face into my hands and breathed a sigh of both relief and exhaustion. I had made it through the night, and even though I didn't get any sleep, it was over. I quickly stuck my feet in my boots and stepped out of my tent to find nothing. It was still night. I had confused the light from the moon as dawn. No one was around my tent, and the time it took from when they spoke to me to when I came out was not enough time for one of the boys to make it back to their tent before I saw them. That pricking feeling came back, but this time it was all over my body as I heard a voice in my head say, "Don't turn around." I slowly sat backwards in my tent and zipped myself up into it with shaking hands. I laid down in my sleeping bag and covered my face and prayed. I prayed for so long until I finally fell asleep. In the morning, I woke up to the familiar voice of Sam talking to another scout outside my tent. I could feel the warmth of the sun beating down into my tent. I know I looked terrible by the way Sam did a double take upon seeing me. "Oh, geez, you look like you didn't sleep at all." "Did you come to my tent last night?" I asked him. Sam, still studying my face, slowly responded, "No." "Please don't play with me. If you did, you got me good. Great. Just don't continue the joke right now if you did, please." I felt a little bad being accusatory, because Sam was actually a pretty no-nonsense guy, especially when it came to being in charge on camping trips. "Diana, no. I wouldn't try to scare you. I know how nervous you were about sleeping alone out here. He folded up his pad before tossing it into his canoe and throwing it over his shoulder. But I guess you were too scared last night. I looked confused. What? Sam gestured up the embankment into the woods. I heard you make a few trips up there. Next time just get a Gatorade bottle and you won't have to leave your tent. Around that time, the rest of the scouts had announced that they had finished cooking breakfast, and everyone migrated to the campfire. But I felt like I had just sunk down to my knees in the river mud. I had left the tent once. I went up the embankment and came back down once. So if it wasn't me, what had Sam heard coming out of the woods and checking out my tent multiple times that night? Why hadn't I heard it? I have told this story to people before, and they say I had just dreamed it, but I know that I hadn't. I had been too cold and had sat up in my sleeping bag most of the night, rubbing my legs. And since I know it wasn't a dream, what is hiding and hunting in the woods along the Buffalo River?